All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Jeff Warner. I'm an LA County Master Gardener. I'm working right now on a CDFA, California Department of Food and Agriculture grant that the Master Gardeners have had for a couple of years now, and it's about to wrap up this month. And it's to get the information out to the public about a citrus disease that's spreading here in Los Angeles County and surrounding areas. And at the same time, to promote growing alternative types of fruit trees. This talk is really more about citrus, though, which is a little bit different than our grant objectives. But a lot of people are really interested in growing citrus because it's certainly one of the easiest types of fruit trees for home gardeners to maintain. So let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started. Citrus care in the home garden. What we're seeing here is a few varieties of citrus. We're going to go through a lot of different varieties of citrus so you can see sort of what the selections are out there for Californians. We'll talk a little bit about the history of citrus. We'll go into some of the issues with how to select citrus for your area, what you need to know about planting citrus and caring for it. And at the end, we'll talk about the Asian Citrus Psyllid and Huanglongbing disease that's causing us so much consternation here. So my first slide here, I'm showing you a few interesting ones. Mandarins, you probably know, are Satsuma mandarins. The middle one is an Oro Blanco grapefruit, one of my favorite grapefruits. On the right is a Smith Red Valencia, something I just learned about, really interesting, highly colored citrus. On the lower left, the Meyer lemon. In the middle is the Makrut lime, which used to be called the Kaffir lime. We're trying to get away from that term because that's a racial slur in South Africa. So Makrut is a better term for it. And then the Buddha hand citron, really popular just because it's so ornamental and interesting looking. Okay, so a little background. Citrus, of course, is very popular in California. We're the second largest producer in the nation, but we're the number one producer of fresh eating citrus. So the citrus that needs to really look good for people to want to buy it. The top 5 varieties in California are navel oranges, mandarins, lemons, valencias, and grapefruits. And in residential citrus, there's almost as many, or maybe as many, residential citrus trees as there are commercial citrus trees, with about 60% of yards in California having at least one citrus tree. Where citrus is not just important now, it's been a big part of our history. The missionaries brought the first citrus seeds here from Spain back in 1769. In 1804, the San Gabriel Mission had the first really significant citrus orchard. And then it took quite a few years before the first commercial orchard was planted in what is now downtown LA by William Wolskill, who played a really important role, many roles in California's agricultural history. And then 1849, the gold rush created such a demand for citrus. So that was a really boom to the industry. And then shortly after that, California became a state. Now, the first citrus here brought by, from Spain was a really seedy orange that was probably good. I don't think we could even get that orange anymore. And then a citron type lemon. But it was really the introduction of the Washington Naval Orange that really changed the game here. In 1873, a couple, the Tibbetts family in Riverside, wrote to what was then the USDA, or is now the USDA in Washington, asking them what trees they should grow in their area. And they sent them a couple young trees that had come up from Brazil, the Washington Naval Orange. It actually originated as a sport on another type of orange tree. It was selected because it was seedless and then sent to Washington. And so it became known as the Washington Navel, but really it should be the Brazil Navel Orange. And this orange was so much better than anything else growing at the time that all the growers in the area wanted to grow this navel orange. And so the Tibbetts family made a really good living just selling the budward for grafting and propagating the citrus. Oh, there we go, Melissa, thank you. And anyway, so that they called that boom the California second gold rush in the 1880s. And then other things, we had the California Fruit Exchange, et cetera, occur. And the picture on the right there is showing you those two first, Washington Navel Orange, the mother trees, planted at the Tibbetts house. They actually had it behind barbed wire and stuff to protect people from poaching the cuttings from them. And I'm going to show you more about those trees in just a minute when we get to the Washington Navel. So a little background on the citrus family. Most of the citrus we eat today originated in Southeast Asia. And the varieties that they had there in nature were the Mandarin, the Pomelo, the Citron, the Pepita, and the Kumquat. And almost all the citrus that we're familiar with are hybrids from that citrus, either genetic mutations or cross-pollinated hybrids. So I was surprised when I first found out about this, that oranges, lemons, limes, and grapefruit, the citrus I grew up with, none of those are really original citrus. They're all hybrids of these other 5 citrus trees. But there's also some varieties that are coming up from Australia that are native to Australia. And one of those in particular is gaining popularity here, the finger lime. And it also plays an important role in the fight to control Huanglongbing disease. So we'll talk more about the finger lime. But citrus, mutates very readily, and it also cross-pollinates very readily. That's why we have so many different varieties. So we'll start with navel oranges, and we'll go through a selection of citrus here. Now, navels, of course, are seedless. They're easier to peel than the Valencia oranges. The navel at the end of a seedless of the navel orange is actually a secondary fruit that hasn't fully developed. And then all the varieties that we have are coming from those original 2 trees. A lot of these, they have some new varieties that are either mutations or some other way they got, maybe from a seed, but they are all, because they do have seeds once in a while, but they're all from the original Washington navel oranges. So like the Caracara orange, which is really popular now, it has that pink flesh and low acidity. That's another bud sport that came off of a Washington navel tree that was growing in Venezuela. There's several others out there, like the Robinson I'm showing you a picture of, that produces the fruit in clusters. But there's many others to choose from. A lot of times when you go to a nursery looking for a tree, it'll just tell you it's a navel orange or a Valencia orange. But in reality, it's got to be a particular variety of one of those things. And if you go to nurseries that specify the varieties, you can be a lot more particular about the ones you select and not just go with sort of a generic. So I mentioned the 2 Washington original navel orange trees. So around, when they were about 30 years old, the city of Riverside decided they really needed to preserve these really historically important trees. And so they took them over, they actually moved them. One of them was moved to the historic Mission Inn. And you see that operation going on right here in the picture. And interestingly, Teddy Roosevelt was there participating in the planting of that tree. He's there somewhere in the middle there with the shovel. That tree, unfortunately, came down with a very common citrus ailment called Phytophthora root rot. Phytophthora is a fungal-like disease, very, very common in citrus even today. It can affect the roots, the trunk, and even the fruit. And a lot of the citrus varieties we're growing today are selected because they are more resistant to Phytophthora, or they're grown on rootstocks that are more resistant to Phytophthora. So the original oranges were not, and navel oranges are not. And so you can see the trunk damage here on the preserved piece that came here. This scar is from the Phytophthora. So we still do have one of these parent trees. It's planted on the crossroads in Riverside, just out on Arlington and Magnolia Streets. Just a little public intersection. You can just walk up to it, although it's completely enclosed now in a screen house to keep out the insects that we're worried about. But this tree too got sick with Phytophthora and would have died except for a heroic effort to save it. And what you can see here in the middle picture, they planted a bunch of different types of citrus saplings that they thought that were more resistant to Phytophthora, and then grafted them into the trunk of the mother tree here. And it's something called in-arch grafting. And these took, and you can see, 20 some years later, how these have grown out. And even these started getting sick. And so they had to plant some other varieties as well later on. So there's a lot of different trees supporting this one tree now. As you see, that tree is still alive, and I'll show you what it looked like a year ago when I visited. So on to Valencia oranges. This is the #1 juicing orange. It's got a very bright, distinctive colored juice. Generally few seeds, although there is a variety that's considered seedless, the midnight. And this variety is different than in Washington navels. They ripen typically in the late winter, maybe December. They're a little sour in December typically, through April, even into May. Although my tree gets a little bit, you get some off flavors in the fruit by the time if the fruit's on the tree all the way into May. but they're still really good right now in April. Anyway, and this was another one that William Wolfskill contributed to. He developed the first Valencia Orange in a grove in Santa Ana that he owned. So blood oranges, these are popular, made very popular by the show Dexter. The Moro is the most common one, the one in the center there. It's got the most color of the three main varieties of blood oranges, the Tarocco, the Moro, and the Sanguinelli. The Moro tends to be a little tart for my taste, not as sweet, not as flavorful. I think the Tarocco is the best flavored of the three, but doesn't necessarily develop a lot of color. These tend to need a lot of summer heat to develop the best color. If you're on the coast, I'd probably grow the Moro because it doesn't take as much of the inland heat to develop the color and flavor. But the flavors and the color from this come from anthocyanins, the same compounds that give blueberries their color. So it's very healthy antioxidant compound, but they do take some special conditions to get the best quality blood oranges. Mandarins, there's been an explosion of Mandarin varieties out there. These are typically smaller and flatter than oranges, although I have one in front of me I'm going to show you at the end called the Sumo, which is really a hybrid. It's really a Tangor, a Mandarin orange hybrid, which is about almost as big as a Naval Orange, and got to be really popular. But they, obviously they're easy to peel, very, very popular. And there's many different types of mandarins. They're classified as clementines, which are the smaller ones that are really easy to peel. Some of the things like sweeties tend to be clementines. We've got satsumas, which come from Japan, that are also sweet and seedless, but maybe not quite as easy to peel. And then tangerines. The original tangerine actually was a dancing mandarin that just happened to be imported from Tangiers, but now that's become a category of mandarins as well. Then hybrids like tangelos, where they've crossbred mandarins with grapefruit or pomelos, and tangers, which they've done the same sort of crossbreeding of mandarins and oranges. So some of the more popular ones you've probably run into are like the Mineola here, which always has that that extension at the end. But usually these are not in the markets may label some of them, but usually they just call them mandarins. So there's so many to choose from. This is a article, there's a link here to an article put out by UC-A&R that I think is a really great place to start when you're looking at citrus, trying to decide what to grow. And it's called Tried and True or Something New. It's comparing a lot of the varieties that you may be more familiar with, that are in the market, that are being grown on a large scale, to some of these other varieties that are maybe even better, that people are that are really great for the backyard. This is really focused on what backyard growers can look into, like this Kishu mandarin on the right. These are really great. I got to try these up in Central California. The skins are very delicate though, and so when you pick them, you typically tear them. You have to snip them off if you don't want to tear them. And so they're not going to probably be in the market very much, but they're a great variety for the home grower. So we also see mandarins, the explosion of branding of mandarins with cuties and halos and peels and others. Partially, a lot of this was started by the Wonderful Company, with their wonderful pomegranates, their wonderful pistachios, and more recently they have these seedless lemons they're marketing under their brand as well. But some of these, like cuties, they're not a particular variety of mandarin. Cuties on their own website will tell you that from November to January, the cuties that you're buying are actually clementines, and from February to April, they're the W. Murcott mandarins. So that's the same sort of idea with all of these. They're going to be a mix of different types depending on the season and what's available for them. So lemons, these are great for any area of California, particularly the coast where you now have the heat for developing the sweeter citrus. So they tend to be very vigorous spreading trees. The most popular one is the most well-grown one is the Lisbon, but for homeowners, I think the Eureka is a better choice because it's closer to being thornless than the Lisbon, which is very thorny. And there's other varieties like the variegated pink, known as the pink lemonade, which was a bud sport off of a Eureka, and it's got this pinkish flesh and stripes on the fruit. The stripes sort of disappear as it ripens, but it looks really nice, very ornamental. You've got other varieties like the Meyer lemon, which is a cross between a lemon and an orange. So it's not as sour. It's not truly sweet, but it's really less sour than most of the other lemons, and it's often used in cooking because of that. And they're small trees, easy to maintain. If you need a tree for a container, for instance, the Meyer lemons are a really great choice in that case. So limes, the true lime, the original lime was the Mexican lime, also called the key or bartender's lime. These are the really small limes on the right here. It's a fairly cold sensitive plant, so not good for high, higher elevations like the high desert. They're more likely to get damaged during the winter. In that case, you'd want to grow a Persian lime. The Persian limes are the grocery store lime, the one we find the most in the grocery stores, and they're actually a hybrid between the key lime and a lemon. The Bears is the variety. If you go looking for a tree, it most likely is going to be a Bear's lime or Beer's lime, which are thornless, pretty much seedless, and a really good choice for the home grower. So grapefruits, these are the citrus with a little bit of that bitterness to them. The trees tend to be the largest in the citrus family. The fruit is called grapefruit because it grows in clusters. But grapefruit needs the most heat of all citrus to really develop good, sweet fruit. And that's why so much of our grapefruit is grown in the desert areas. There are some good varieties out there, like the Duncan's a really old variety. The Marsh was the first seedless variety, but more, the ones we see in the market more like the Ruby Red and the Rio Red. Those are a little bit sweeter, really good varieties of grapefruit. But if you're in an area that doesn't get enough heat, or you just like these other varieties, the Oro Blanco and the Mellow Gold are a couple things developed at UC Riverside where they've hybridized grapefruits with other things, like in the case they have this other sweet pomelo that they hybridize them with, and these are really great tasting. The Oro Blanco is my favorite among this group, and it doesn't take a lot of heat to grow, so it's a really good choice for the home gardener. Now, pomelos are the largest citrus. This is one of the original, 5 citrus. They're a little bit less bitter than a grapefruit, though to me they still have some of that grapefruit flavor. They also need a fair amount of heat to sweeten. There's several varieties. Often, again, they're just marked as pomelos in the market, but once in a while you'll see a certain variety out there. The Tahitian is interesting. Citrus flavor. The Siamese sweet is being used a lot in breeding programs. It's not one you're going to find in the marketplace, and I don't even think you can buy cuttings of this one right now. But growers are able to buy this, and they hybridize other citrus with it. It doesn't have a lot of interesting flavor, but it's very sweet, and so it's been used with other things like the Mellow Gold and Oro Blanco that I showed you. I have a cocktail. That's a dwarf variety. Again, it's a mixture of that Siamese and then a Mandarin. It's very, very seedy, but it's a great juicing fruit. It's got sort of like a grapefruit mixed with an orange juice mixed together. So really nice flavor. And then this Valentine, which I'd like to get, it's in the picture here. It's got some blood orange mixed into it as well. So that looks like a really interesting one. I'll show you how you can get cuttings to do your own grafting or rooting in a little bit. Kumquats. This is not actually citrus. It's Fortunella, which is it's in the same family, but it's a different genus than the rest of the citrus we're showing you. These are very cold hardy, so great choices for higher elevation areas. The fruit holds really well. And these are fruit. If you have never eaten these, you eat the whole fruit. The skin the sweetness is all in the skin, and the pulp tends to be quite sour. So the one in the market is normally this Nagami. The Nagami is a variety that's more oblong. The pulp is quite sour. The one I really like is the Miwa. You can find both of these now in nurseries. The Miwa is a little bit rounder fruit, and it's not as sour a pulp, so the overall experience is sweeter. But there are some other varieties, like the Nordman is a sweetless version of Nagami, and then they have a kind of an ornamental Centennial, which is variegated. Then there's other hybrids of these, like the Calamandan, which is super popular in the Philippines. It's used there instead of lemons, and used to make a lot of marinades and things. And that one is a really great ornamental tree. Also small, you can keep that in a container. Tends to have fruit on it throughout the year, so it's really, really nice tree. And other things like mixing, like Limquats, which is obviously a lime and a kumquat mixed together. And there's other ones with Mandarin quats and other things where they've mixed the genes together to give you some interesting, always sour though, citrus. Then a few other interesting ones, the Buddha's hands, the types of citron that a lot of people grow because it's crazy looking, and you actually can use it. It's used to flavor liqueurs. It's very fragrant, great smell and taste for that use, or they candy it and use the whole thing. It doesn't really have any pulp in it at all. It's all rind. I'll skip over the finger line for a second, go on to the bergamot. The oils from the skin from that are used to flavor, what is that tea? I'm blanking on the tea. Here it is, Earl Grey tea. That's right. Some of my friends' favorite teas. Ugly fruits and a really large Mandarin hybrid. This is a Tangelo, actually, a Mandarin Orange hybrid. I have not seen that one in the market, but it's interesting looking. Yuzu is another popular one in Japan, used like lemons again, very flavorful. Some places like Trader Joe's has a yuzu hot sauce. Very interesting. There's the makrut as well, where mostly the leaves are used, but the juice and the rind are also used in flavoring. It's a big part of Thai cooking, for instance. So the finger line here, this was a picture I downloaded from the internet of what these look like when they're typically picked. There's really only one variety available in California right now, even though Australia has a lot of different varieties. We can't get them here yet. They have to come through the Citrus Clonal Protection Program before they can be introduced into California. And I think they're working on bringing in new varieties now, but I don't know how long that process is going to take. This picture, a little rough picture, I took yesterday when I visited the Pomona Fairplex, where they're growing several of these finger line trees. And that's what the fruit looks like right now. It's overripe at this point. It develops, these dark hues, even reddish hues, and the vesicles become pinkish looking. Still very sour tasting, but these are really popular. When we have field trips there, the kids just love to eat these. You cut them in half and you can squeeze out the juice vesicles like caviar. So real fun. It's beginning to be very popular for use in cocktails and hors d'oeuvres as well. And then here's the Sumo. This is the most trendy citrus right now in California. It's been around for a long time. They developed this in Japan back in the 1970s, but it's only more recently in the last decade really been available here. It's a hybrid of a Tangour and a Mandarin. It's very large. I actually picked up some today at Sprouts. Good size. Now here's a Washington Naval alongside of it. Naval's a little bit bigger than the Sumo is, but it's very big for a Mandarin. And here's a cutie next to it, tiny. There's like 4 of these to 1 of these, so it's very, very easy to peel. It has that knot on the top. That's why it got marketed as a Sumo. The variety is actually called Shiranui, but it's been it's a trademark name for marketing the Sumo. And in Japan, they market it as the Ponkan Mandarin, so or Depakan rather, Mandarin. Anyway, very sweet, super easy to peel. One of the easiest ones I've ever peeled. It doesn't make a mess at all. It's a great traveling citrus. It doesn't get in your hands. But it's almost out of the market right now. It's January through April. April's the end of the season, so it's last chance to get them. They're a little bit pricey. Today I paid about $3.50 a pound for these, a lot more than you would for your typical citrus, but really excellent. Flavors it's different flavored than other citrus. I haven't decided how much I like it. I like it, but it doesn't have quite enough sourness for me. The first one I tried a couple of weeks ago, I thought it reminded me of orange gelatin, but the one I had today, I think more like canned mandarins. It's a little bit different. Not quite sure where I'm going to settle on this one. But I got interested in it because someone from the California Rare Fruit Growers, the president of the Foothill chapter, sent me this link to a CNN article they just did on this. So I gave you the link for that there. This is one where we can't get trees right now. They're not selling these in nurseries. The Citrus Clonal Protection Program at UC Riverside has one. They have what they call 3 accessions of this type of tree. Basically, accessions are where they've gone. They've collected material from a particular location on a particular time. And the one that the commercial growers are growing, they have it, but they're not letting the public have it. There's another one that they are letting the public have, but interestingly, it has lots of seeds, where at least in the orchard where it's being grown with lots of other types of citrus. So it may be that this particular citrus has to be grown in isolation from other pollinators, so it doesn't have seeds. I don't really know the story on that, because typically these don't have any seeds at all when you buy them in the market. Although I have heard people do get the occasional seed in these. So we're going to look a little bit about how citrus grows so we can decide how to take care of it. So the flowers are what are referred to as perfect. That means they have both the male and the female parts. They also refer to that as being a hermaphrodite flower. So you can see the pollen are on the stamen along the edge here in a whorl around the center stigma. And so you just have to, for most citrus, they are self-fruitful, meaning they can self-pollinate and you'll get good fruit. There's a few that require another citrus to pollinize them. But generally very easy to get a lot of fruit on citrus. And of course, the bees love those flowers and they do the pollinating for us most of the time. And then you start off with these little tiny, undeveloped citrus early on. That's what my trees look like right now. The flowers have mostly dropped and now I just have those little tiny fruit. So like I said, most are self-fruitful. In other words, they don't need another citrus tree to pollinate them, unlike a lot of other types of fruit trees you might grow in your backyard, like plums. Most varieties of plums need to have another variety of plum to be a pollen source to go back and forth, because when they're pollinated by their own pollen, they don't develop fruit or develop very few fruit. And then navel oranges and mandarins don't produce pollen. And some of the mandarins that are seedless don't produce any viable pollen. As you'll see that they can still produce fruit though. And then there are just some citrus, and this is true of fruit trees in general, that you might get a better crop of fruit and maybe even sometimes better quality fruit if they're cross-pollinated. So we'll look at a few of the seedless and low-seeded varieties. A lot of times they'll mark something as seedless when their definition of seedless is a little bit generous. They can actually have a few seeds and still be called seedless. And so grapefruits, there's the marsh, the frost marsh, Henderson, star ruby, most of the Persian limes, including the bear's lime, some mandarins like the pixie, gold nugget, kishu, and tango, all the navels, satsumas, and then Valencia oranges are always fairly low seeded, but the Campbell, Delta, and Midnight are considered seedless. And then they're seedless because they either don't have viable pollen or they don't have viable ovaries or some combination of the two. There's other ones that are seedless because of their chromosomes. They have an odd number of chromosomes, and this is the same reason we can have seedless watermelon, for instance, because they breed these ones that have just 3 sets of chromosomes, and those typically do not have viable seeds. And so the Oro Blanco and Mellow Gold that I mentioned earlier, those are hybrids that are triploid. The Norman seedless kumquat, the bear's lime, and some varieties of mandarins that are developed at UC Riverside are all have that quality because of the genetics. But they still develop fruit, and it's a process called parthenocarpy. You find that a number of different fruit do that, like bananas. We don't get seeds in our bananas, or at least we don't get developed seeds in our bananas or persimmons, and that's because those fruit are able to develop without pollination occurring. And then some varieties will be seedy if they're near another plant that pollinizes them or pollinates them, another pollinizer. So the few clementines, some tangelos like the Mineola, they're going to have seeds in them if you grow them close to another source of pollen, and the Chandler, Pomelo, and a few others. But so normally, commercially, these of course are grown in huge groves where they're the only type of tree in that grove, so this is not a problem. And then some citrus are really well known for being pollinators, like the Meyer lemon will pollinate any other nearby citrus. And then there are other varieties that are self-fruitful or self-pollinating, and so they're going to always have some seeds no matter what, but they may not have a lot of seeds. It all depends on the number of functioning ovules and pollen that they have. So Eureka and Lisbon lemons typically are going to have seeds, but not necessarily a lot of seeds. It all depends. Number of mandarins, Valencias, and Tangors again, and conditions can affect that as well. So areas that have low humidity, like in most of Southern California, the pollen's not as viable under those conditions, and so you get fewer seeds than you would if you were growing it in, say, Florida. All right, so I'm going to go on to looking at how to look at some of the issues at growing trees at home. And one of the main issues, I think, for everybody is understanding your soil. And one of the easiest things to learn about your soil is the texture. Now, the texture refers to 3 things, the 3 components of soil, the mineral components, the sand, the silt, and the clay, and the relative amounts of each of those. And this affects how well your soil drains, how well air penetrates the soil, because roots need oxygen. It really importantly, it affects the nutrient holding ability of the soil as well. So a soil that doesn't have any clay, for instance, it not only drains really fast, it doesn't hold nutrients. So you fertilize and it washes out very quickly. And so you can determine that really easily doing this soil jar test. Alternatively, you can send it into a lab, a soil testing lab. But the jar test is really easy to do. And so you just go out in the yard, pick your spot where you're interested in learning about the soil there. Remove all the top debris, any mulch and things. You don't want mulch or other things in there. And then dig down maybe a foot and take a sample from different depths and kind of combine them together. Remove all the rocks because we're only looking at these smaller particles. And then fill a jar of about halfway with your material, and then add water, leaving a little air gap so you can shake it up really good. And then set it down. So there's a couple ways to determine, you're going to measure the level, the layers here, and the height of these layers. And you can't just let the whole thing settle. And often you can see visually where these layers are. Sometimes that it's hard to tell, especially between silt and clay, because there's such fine particles. And if they don't have a color difference, you're not going to be able to tell where it is. So what I like to do instead is I do a timing test where you wait a minute, and by a minute, all the sand will have settled out. And so that I can make a mark on the jar. An hour later, all the silt will have settled out, make another mark. And then the clay can take a day or even several days to settle because the particles are so small. And once you have all those marked and measured, you can figure out the percentage of each component in your soil, and then use the soil texture triangle here to put a name to your soil, basically. So here's an example that's 40% sand. So you start down here on the sandbar and you make a mark up, towards the clay side. And my example here is 40% sand. And then silt, you start up there, that's 35% silt, and then finally 25% clay. Now you really only need two of these numbers because two lines will cross, but the third line gives you some confidence that you actually made good measurements. And this example here is really perfect soil. This is right in the middle. You're going to have soil that drains well enough, but has enough clay in it to hold water and to hold nutrients. What you're hoping for is somewhere in the middle and not at the corners or on the sides. My soil is right here on the bottom. It's a loamy sand, almost no clay, really no measurable amount of clay. I can see a little bit of cloudiness after the sand is still settled, but once the clay is settled, it's not really enough to even measure, not on a millimeter scale anyway. And so my soil is problematic that way. You may have another problem. You may have too much clay, in which case your soil doesn't drain very well. So we'll talk about that in a second. So another test to do to really ensure that you're planting your trees someplace that drains well enough to support it. Citrus trees in particular do not like standing water in their soil. They don't like to be in a really heavy clay, wet soil all the time. Because of that Phytophthora and other root rot problems. And this is true of other fruit trees like avocados. So you can do a test by digging a hole that's about a foot deep and wide, fill it with water, let it drain, and then fill it again. And this time you're going to measure it over a period of time to see how quickly it's draining. And if you have, there's different sites will give you different ideal ranges, but something like 2 to 3 inches per hour is a good amount of drainage. Not too fast, not too slow. If it's draining in an inch per hour, that's pretty darn fast, or pretty darn slow. Sorry, if it's less than an inch per hour, that's slow. That's heavy clay. You might have to take some measures in order to have a tree successfully grow there. One of the things you can do is grow the tree in a raised mound or a raised bed. And I'll show you pictures of that. Greater than 4 inches per hour, that's sandy soil like I have, and then you're gonna have a hard time keeping that soil wet and keeping nutrients present in that soil. So one of the things you can do is put a heavy layer of mulch on that soil. That helps hold the water in, adds organic matter into the soil, which also binds nutrients and helps make them available to the trees. So citrus is almost all grafted. There's a few varieties that, like the Australian fingerline, which you might find without having been grafted. But a grafted tree basically is 2 trees in one. The scion is the variety that you bought for the fruit, and the rootstock is the lower trunk and the roots, and is normally selected for its disease resistance. Although there is one citrus rootstock called Flying Dragon, which also strongly dwarfs the tree as well. And different rootstocks make different graft partners for different types of citrus. Like lemons don't do well on things except for microphylla. Other types of citrus are more commonly on citrange or trifoliate. So this is how they do it. When they take a small bud and they graft it into the side of the rootstock, and then a new little branch forms, and then they train that upwards after a while, and then they'll cut the top off here and get rid of the top of the rootstock after this year the graft is taken. And here's an example. This is my Washington Naval Orange, or it's a Naval Orange. I don't know if it's the Washington, since it was here with the house when I moved in. This is what the graft unions often look like as the trees get really old. They're kind of gnarly looking. You start getting folds in it. You always easily identify it on citrus. And here's a sucker coming up. This is the first sucker I've ever seen from this tree, and I'm not worrying about it taking over the tree at this point, but suckers should be removed so that you don't have that problem. So planting a new tree, citrus, any kind of a new tree you want to plant in a hole that's 2 or 3 times as wide as the root ball, but only as deep as the root ball. You don't want the tree to sink down afterwards. The potting soil and things that the tree came in, those tend to break down, and the tree is going to slump, and the crown of that tree, once it gets below the grade, it starts filling in, and that covers up that really important area called the crown, where the trunk and the roots meet, and that area has to be able to breathe. So if it gets covered up, you'll start having problems with your citrus trees. So what I recommend, and most people recommend now, is you actually plant it a little bit high, maybe a couple inches above where you want it to be, and if it stays a little high, that's fine. You just don't want it getting below grade. When you planted, this is not a citrus tree, this was a plum I planted. I don't have any pictures of my citrus as I planted them, but that shows you a typical graft union right there. You see that little jog in the tree, and then having a water basin around the young tree is a good idea. And then I would fill that all in with mulch, so you wouldn't even see the basin. You won't need that after the second year, but it really helps keep that root ball wet the first year. So if you do have really soggy clay soil, the solution, one of the best solutions for that, is to plant it in a mound. It could be a foot or more above the grade, and that'll help it drain. You're just using the regular native soil and building up a mound. Maybe not easy to do in a home if you don't know where you're going to get the extra soil, but this will really help with drainage. Alternatively, you can use a raised bed, but you don't want to fill this bed with this organic bedding mix that's going to break down quickly, because it's this tree is going to be there for decades, and potting mix doesn't last for decades. So it's best to use a native soil, maybe amend it a little bit, but mostly you want inorganic material, the mineral material, so it doesn't break down. So mulching is so important. I got 3 loads of mulch last year. I mulched about 4 years ago, and most of it disappeared after a year. I put down, after 3 years, I put down about 3 inches, and I was down to just little specks here and there. And I started having problems with my trees drying out during the summer, and I was getting some leaf drop from trees that hadn't had that problem before. And so you can use this service called Chip Drop, which will give you mulch for free. It's basically any tree trimming company in the area. They will sell your information to them. I think they charge them like $20, and then the company comes and drops a load of tree trimmings on your driveway. Now, this was the biggest drop I'd gotten. This was my last drop. I really needed a small drop on my last drop because I had solarized my lawn. You might be able to see the plastic there that's on my front lawn. And so after I took that plastic off, I wanted to cover it up with mulch, and I got way more than I needed, but that's the only problem with Chip Drop. You can't control how much you're going to get. It's just whatever load that guy has. I've had some loads that were a third this big, and this, like I said, this was my biggest load. So now I've got 8 to 10 inches of mulch around my entire yard, more than I was planning on. But that's going to be really good for the trees when it gets hot this summer. So this mulch, it helps conserve water. Of course, it suppresses weeds like any mulch, insulates the roots, which is really important in our inland valley summer heat. Slows erosion, particularly like on slopes. And then being an organic matter, it also adds that organic matter very slowly into the soil. And when I mean organic matter, I mean mostly carbon. The carbon is really the basis of the soil food web. And so once you start having carbon added to your soil, you're going to see a lot more life come out of your soil, starting at the microscopic level, but eventually you'll see more, worms and other things living in your soil. So anyway, you got the link there for chip drop. And I tend to, they give you an option to pay the $20 that the arborist would pay. And I usually do that so I get a drop more quickly. I know if the arborist doesn't have to pay anything, he's going to come to my house before he comes to somebody else's. And so this last drop, I literally got an hour after I put my order in for it. It can take a couple weeks, but that was super fast. So citrus doesn't go dormant like, plums and apples. And so they do still need to be watered throughout the year, even in the winter. The best thing to do is just sort of check the soil, see how dry it is before adding more water. Most of the roots of citrus are shallow in the top couple feet of soil. And so we don't really need to water deeper than that, but you want to water, all trees for the most part, deeply, but infrequently as much as possible. On coastal areas, that might be every month during the summer. In inland areas, it could be every week or every 2 weeks, depending on how hot it is and depending on the conditions of your soil. And you don't want it to dry out too deeply. That's why I started seeing some leaf drop. But there are different ways, of course, to apply water automatically using things like this is a system called TRIC, or tree ring irrigation contraption, that you see Riverside came up with, or you see A&R came up with. Basically, it's inline drip line, inline emitter tubing that's circled around the tree. Tree bubblers are probably a lot more common, especially in commercial orchards, or now there's micro sprayers as well. And of course, that applies it slowly, especially important in clay soils. You apply the water slowly so it doesn't run off before it absorbs. Citrus, like avocados and mangoes, need more nitrogen than most other fruit trees. Most fruit trees, you feed them fairly little nitrogen, because that encourages a lot of leafy growth, but not as much fruiting. But citrus is different. It does need more nitrogen. And so they sell a lot of these fertilizers that are marketed for citrus and avocado. There's one here that's one of our master gardeners, the head of our orchard team, likes a product from Lily Miller called Citrus and Avocado Food, which is a 10-6-4 combination. And basically, for trees that are over a year old, you want to apply, 2 portions, maybe once in February and then again around May. And this tells you how much actual nitrogen. So say you have a mature tree and you're going to have 2 doses for a total of 1 pound of actual nitrogen. Well, a product like this, which has 10% nitrogen, and so I need a total of 10 pounds to get 1 pound of nitrogen. So I'm going to divide that into 2 5-pound applications. So you can see how buying a little bag, like a 4-pound bag of fertilizer, is not going to go very far with a mature tree. But they do sell bigger bags, like 40-pound bags. I've also used high nitrogen organic, manures, like chicken manure in particular, is very high in nitrogen, makes a good citrus fertilizer. But citrus also, besides needing nitrogen, they also typically have a lot of deficiencies with micronutrients. Iron, manganese, zinc are probably the most common, but I've also seen manganese and magnesium deficiencies. And to treat those, you can use these citrus micronutrient mixes. This one here is a chelated one. This is, again, our orchard team likes this one called Growers Blend, which has copper, iron, manganese, and zinc. And I've also used this one. This one's really common. You can find this in all the big box stores. It's got magnesium, iron, manganese, and zinc, and it's a sulfate rather than a chelate, but they're both liquids. You can spray them on the leaves. The plants will actually absorb it from the leaves. And then I usually treat the ground as well for more long-term treatment. But a foliar spray gives you a quick fix. So pruning, I'm not going to go too much into pruning except for some of the real basics here. Again, citrus doesn't need a lot of pruning. The 2 basic cuts are the heading cut, and that's where you're shortening a branch. Often these are used in the summertime to shorten certain branches of trees when you're trying to keep a tree more compact. You want to make a cut just above a bud, about 1/4 inch, and you try to pick a bud that's facing outwards from the center of the tree, because anytime you do a heading cut, it does lead to new growth. What happens is you take off the top of this branch, and the bud at the very tip is releasing a hormone called auxin that keeps the buds lower down dormant. And so once you've cut that off, that hormone disappears, and the bud at the top and maybe a few others below it start to grow in a couple of weeks. But the growth is, if you do this in the middle of summer, the growth is going to be a little bit slower than if you do this in the winter. So it's still a good way to control the size of a tree. And then the other cut is a thinning cut, where you're just actually completely removing a branch. This could be called a removal cut. And the thing to be aware of with thinning cuts is you don't want to damage this area here. This is the branch collar. There are special cells in there that release waxes and form callus to cover over that wound as quickly as possible. You've probably seen a lot of damaged trees where they've cut flush with the trunk, and that never fully heals. You'll have a scar there forever, and it becomes a place where you can have beetles and other tree bark invading insects burrow in there, so you don't want to do that. Okay, this is not a citrus tree per se. It's just a generic diagram. It's not. This one doesn't have a graft, but it shows you some of the things you should do with pruning. Water sprouts, particularly on lemons, are a big problem. This is really vertical growth that occurs. They go straight up to the canopy of the tree. You know, these are showing you really short ones, but in fact, they grow way up into the top of the tree, and they'll shade out the whole tree. So you want to remove water sprouts. Those vertical shoots have a lot of vegetative buds on them, but typically they don't produce any fruit for you. So they're just shading out the rest of the tree, which is going to inhibit the fruiting on the rest of the tree. So this is the tree's way of getting up into the sun, but we don't want it to do that. We want to control it. So we take those off. Usually after you've harvested the fruit is the best time to prune your citrus. There's no hard and fast rule about when to prune citrus like there are for stone fruit and things. And then suckers, root and crown suckers on a citrus, which is grafted, which is most of it, this is going to be rootstock. And so you do not want to let these grow. Rootstock can actually take over and become the dominant part of the tree. I've had friends asked me to taste a mandarin, which was horrible tasting. It was bitter, inedible, and it wasn't the original mandarin he planted. What happened, his tree had multiple trunks coming up from it, and most of those trunks were rootstock that they just hadn't taken out and didn't know to take out. And so the fruit on rootstock is never good. You don't want it. It all tastes terrible. And so you take those out. And then the other thing with citrus is the skirt. Now, a lot of commercial orchards let the skirt grow all the way to the ground. Because you get a lot of fruit growing along that bottom area there. But for the homeowners, it's usually better to trim the skirt up a couple of feet, and that helps prevent more pest problems, particularly when you're trying to control ants. I'm going to show you a product for controlling ants, keeping them from coming up the trunk. And if the skirt's touching the ground, it's not going to do you any good. Some citrus, just like some other types of fruit trees, can be alternate bearing, where you get a heavy crop followed by a light crop. What they recommend for that is if you have a variety of a Valencia or Mandarin that does this, that during the years when there's a heavy crop, you do some thinning, extra thinning. Normally citrus thins itself, something called June drop, or all the extra little fruit drop off on their own, and you usually don't have to do much to thin citrus like you do with peaches and some other fruit. But in order to try to reduce the effects of alternate bearing, taking out, reducing the load during the heavy years will help you get a better crop during the light years. But in any case, it's a good practice if it's too much on there anyway. I have a Meyer lemon that I've had for about 3 years now. And the first year, it's a tiny little plant, only about 1.5 feet tall. And I let it produce like 20 lemons on that plant. And what happened was it completely stunted the tree. It didn't grow at all that first year. And so last year I took off all but a couple of the lemons, and now the tree is 2 or 3 times as big as it was, and it's looking much healthier because often you don't want to let your trees produce fruit very much at all in the first couple of years because of that problem with stunting. All right, and then I did this talk originally for a group in Santa Monica, and so they wanted to know what kind of varieties to grow in a cool coastal climate. So basically all your sour fruit grows well on the coast because it doesn't need the heat to develop good, the sugars that you need for sweet fruit. But those 2 hybrid grapefruits are good on the coast. The Pixie Mandarin's good, and then a variety. And then if you're determined to grow some of the other ones that require more heat, you can try to maximize the amount of heat that the plant experiences during the summer by planting on the south side of your property, for instance, where it's going to get the most sun and heat. Or planting near a structure like this is a spalliate lemon, I think, next to a wall, and the heat from the heat that it picks up from the wall is going to actually intensify around the plant, so you'll get even more heat than you will out in the yard. All right, so this is where we go into the part of the very objectives of the grant here to talk to you about the Asian Citrus Psyllid and Huanglongbing disease. This is a really bad disease of citrus that we unfortunately have here in Southern California. The insect's really tiny. It's called a psyllid, an Asian citrus psyllid. It's about the size of an aphid, but very distinctive looking. They have a little mouth part that they insert into the leaf, where they're sucking the sap from the leaf. And they always sit in this posture at a 45-degree angle. And there's really no other insect in Southern California that's going to look anything like this, certainly not on your citrus trees. And so if you see that, you'll recognize it right away. They're very easy. You can see them with your naked eye, but to get a good look, you need a little, like a 10x magnifier. You don't see them most of the year until there's new growth on our trees. So recently we just had our flush, they call this feather flush. The adults, the females are going to lay their eggs into the tips of this feather flush. And it's because the nymphs can only feed on this tender growth. The adults can feed on mature, hardened off leaves, but the nymphs can't do that. And so you're very unlikely to see these insects except when there's flush on your tree, which normally late winter, early spring, or in some cases, particularly on the coast, you might get multiple flushes through the year. So you want to keep an eye out for them. The nymphs are also very distinctive looking. They produce honeydew, just like most of these other sap-sucking insects, like the aphids and scale. And the honeydew is basically excess sugars. They don't need all the sugar that's in the sap. They're actually filtering out the protein, and so the extra sugar is excreted. But the psyllids are unique. They excrete it into this waxy tubules, and so if you see these tubules, you'll know for sure you have the nymphs of the psyllid. Now, the feeding they do some feeding damage, like any other insect feeding on your trees. They inject a little bit of a toxin from their saliva that causes the leaves to pinch and twist, and sometimes little tips die back. But it's not major damage. It's probably not something you'd ever even want to bother trying to treat, and we wouldn't be talking about it today. The reason we're talking about it is because the insect can also carry a bacteria that they can transmit to the tree when they're feeding. They can pick it up from an infected tree and then bring it to an uninfected tree. And it creates this disease, Huanglongbing, which is also called yellow shoot disease or citrus greening disease, as we'll see in a minute. The bacteria get into the phloem, which is the sap carrying part of the vascular system right underneath the bark. And they're able to fit through these little pores between the cells. They're able to, sometimes they're round, but they can actually squeeze themselves down and get through these pores and spread throughout the tree. What the tree does is it tries to block these pores, this area called the sieve plates. And they form callus, which clogs up the pores. But of course, as a side effect, they're also blocking up the flow of everything else through the phloem, which is really important for moving the photosynthetates from the leaves to the rest of the tree, all the sugars and things that are produced in the leaves that the rest of the tree needs. And that's why you start getting the symptoms. So the first 1 or 2 years, you may not see any symptoms in an infected tree. It takes a while before it starts showing up. When you do, the first symptoms are in the leaves. You'll see this, what they refer to as a blotchy mottle. That's asymmetrical. If you divide the leaf up, the left and right sides look different. It also doesn't follow the vein pattern. Most of the types of nutrient deficiencies, you'll see the veins sort of outlined, as I'll show you in a second. You don't see that with Huanglongbing disease, and you may have thickened veins on the back. They call those corky veins. Not all varieties of citrus have that problem. So this is showing you some of the, like here's iron deficiency at different stages, different severities, and zinc deficiency. You can see how the chlorosis is between the veins, which is really typical, and you can clearly see the vein pattern, whereas you don't see that in Huanglongbing disease. Still, I think it's very difficult to diagnose based on just the leaf symptoms, because there are other things that can create sort of blotchy looking patterns in your leaves. As the disease progresses, it begins to affect the fruit. Oranges don't color up properly, hence we have citrus greening disease. Normally oranges color up from the bottom up, so they should be orange here and maybe green up here still if it hasn't fully ripened. In this disease, the bottom stays green more often, or the whole fruit stays green. And so as it gets worse, the fruit gets smaller, lopsided, and very bitter tasting. So it really becomes unusable. Eventually, the disease gets into the roots, and once it does, the tree is going to die after a little while. That's sort of the final stage for this disease. If you see a tree, it looks like this, where it's got obviously, the fruit doesn't look good. The canopy is very sparse. I'm sure this tree, if you looked at the ground, is covered in fruit and leaves that have dropped off. Often you're going to see just part of the tree affected by the disease, because think of this as a bacteria that has to slowly move through the tree, so down the branch and then back up another branch. So the insect must have infected it on this side of the tree, and so we just see that the symptoms on that side of the tree initially. And this makes it distinctive. This is an easy way to tell it apart from a nutrient deficiency, which should be more, generalized throughout the whole tree, not just in one part. Now, Florida had this disease before we did, and it's been much more severe there. This is a picture of a Florida orange grove. The insects prefer the trees along the edge of the grove, and so these are trees that have already been cut down in Florida. They like the light areas for some reason, the brighter parts of the pasture. And then here's a tree. This is the very first tree that was infected in Southern California in Hacienda Heights in LA County. That tree, of course, has now been taken out and destroyed. You can see the video of that happening. The CDFA came out and they cut it down, bagged it up, and probably used it for testing initially. But now that's the same thing they do now. If a tree is infected, it has to be destroyed. This all happened because the homeowner went to China and brought back some cuttings in their luggage and grafted it onto an existing tree there. I think it was pomelo cuttings, and which is why we can't just bring citrus into California, because you don't know what's in the cuttings you're bringing in or the plants you're bringing in. And in this case, these cuttings had the bacteria, which then infected the tree and now has infected trees throughout Southern California. So the insect is all over the place. This is a map of the diseased areas where they found diseased trees, but all of Southern California now has this insect. And so all of Southern California basically is in a quarantine for the insect. You're not allowed to move citrus in Southern California. If you buy a tree at a nursery, you can take it home, but then you're not supposed to move it again from there. And you shouldn't take it out of Southern California because you're taking it out of the quarantine. Northern California, they've also found the insect there, but the conditions there aren't as favorable for the insect. Their temperature extremes are higher than they are here in LA. And so they've been able to wipe out the insects every time they find them with pesticide treatments. And so that's really fortunate, because most of our commercial citrus is coming from the Central Valley. But we do still have some commercial citrus out here in Riverside and Orange County. And so this is still a problem. In fact, they just recently found a couple infected insects in a commercial grove in Riverside. So far, the trees have not been shown positive when tested, but they use a DNA test called PCR, the same type of test is used to identify coronavirus. And unfortunately, at early stages of the disease, often they don't pick the right leaves, and so they get these false negatives. And so very likely there are some infected trees there now in Riverside, but in the commercial groves, but it may be a couple of years before they actually see symptoms of that. So this is the quarantine. These are getting closer and closer. This keeps growing. That's that original first tree in Hacienda Heights. So far, the quarantine area is about 1,500 square miles, with nearly 2,300 infected trees having been destroyed. The quarantine was just recently expanded back in March 29th. About 4 square miles were added in Long Beach, and a couple other larger expansions earlier out in Riverside County, in Moreno Valley area, and Corona. So it does keep spreading, unfortunately. So we do hope we can contain it before it gets to us. I'm right up in here. I'm like a mile from the quarantine, so I know it's going to be here soon, or will be found here soon. It's probably already here. Anyway, this map you can find here. It's the CDFA map, or if you're interested in tracking this, you can get email updates anytime the quarantine is expanded because they found new infected trees. Anytime they find an infected tree, they add 5-mile radius around that tree to the quarantine and keep extending it out based on that. There's another map that UC A&R developed that's maybe a little easier to use. You just put in your address and you get this little bullseye, double ring. The inner ring is a 2 square mile radius. The outer is 5 square miles. This is where I put the Huntington Botanical Gardens in, because they have a nice, they have an orange grove there. And these are trees in Alhambra and San Gabriel that were found about 1.5 years ago to be infected with Huanglongbing. And so that put the Huntington Orange Grove within this 5-mile radius. So they are well within the quarantine now. This map will give you different recommendations based on how close you are. When you're this close, they're recommending you actually take your citrus out, with the idea being that it's probably, even though your trees may look well, they probably are already infected. I think that's a pretty tough sell. I don't think most people are going to remove their citrus until they know for sure that it's sick. Anyway, this map you can get through that link there. So what do we do as homeowners or citrus growers at home? We should be inspecting our citrus as often as need be whenever there's new flush for the insect. We can treat with soft insecticides like horticultural oils and insecticidal soaps. This is what master gardeners normally recommend. We're not really experts on the stronger synthetic pesticides. You can use those as well if you know what you're doing. These have to be applied fairly often, however, because they don't leave residues that are effective. You just have to hit the insects when they're there, but they can do the job if you apply those. Whenever the insects are there, every couple of weeks, maybe, or maybe every 5 to 10 days. And then growing plants that attract beneficial insects, things like ladybugs, lacewings, serpent flies. They're going to control these insects for you if you have habitat for them that keeps them on your property. And so they also need pollen. And so one of the better types of plants for them to get pollen from are the plants that have these umbel type flowers, these little umbrella clusters of flowers that they can land on and then get pollen. So this is cilantro. So if you grow cilantro, it's going to bolt as soon as it gets hot outside. But instead of pulling it out, just leave it in and use it for its insectary benefits. But there's lots of other ones, other herbs like dill and fennel, marigolds, yarrows, California buckwheat, and the sweet alyssum is a really good plant to grow around our fruit trees, in particular because of these there are some wafts that are being released that I'll show you next that really like sweet alyssum, and so they'll help keep those wafts in your yard. But ant control is probably the single most important thing you can do, because ants will attack the beneficial insects because they're harvesting the honeydew from the psyllids and protecting them from their predators. And so using this is a sticky barrier called tanglefoot, and you usually put a little paper sleeve around the trunk of the tree and then paint on or smear on this sticky layer, and the ants get stuck in it. You have to come and spread it periodically, because the ants will form bridges over it. But as long as the skirt of the tree is up, there's no other way for the insects to get into the tree. This is really effective for keeping them out of the tree. And then you can try to reduce the numbers. You're never going to get rid of ants, but you can try to reduce the numbers with low toxicity baits. I usually use the boric acid baits like the Taro brand baits, or you can make your own from borax that you get at the laundry aisle in the market. So again, here are some of these Tamarixia wasps. These are being released into California. They were brought in from Pakistan a few years ago by a UC Riverside researcher, and they're very specific to the psyllids. This is their only host. They lay an egg underneath the psyllids, and then the larva of the wasp develops inside the psyllid, killing it. And then they cut a little hole and exit through the top. But if there are ants there, the ants can, they're so much bigger than the psyllids. And you can watch the video here if you're interested. And the ants doing their job, killing the psyllids, killing the wasps, unfortunately. So again, keep the ants out of your trees. Pruning waste, you want to remove as much of your pruning waste. You want to make sure you're not putting your pruning waste into your greens bin until it's fully dried out, because if you do, you may be transporting the insects or diseased plant material. So they recommend leaving it on the ground for a couple of weeks to dry out, or if you want to get rid of it immediately, bag it up and put it in with your regular trash. But you can also compost it on site. That's fine, as long as it's not being moved while the leaves are fresh. When you buy citrus, you should always see these tags now. All of Southern California is in a quarantine for the insect. That's what these tags are telling you. And they're telling you not to move the tree outside the quarantine. If you buy it from a less reputable nursery where you don't see these tags, you have to question the source of these trees and whether they really are disease-free or not. So make sure you have a tag like that before you buy a tree. If you're interested in grafting, this is the way to get the most varieties of citrus. Some of the varieties I show you today, you're not going to find in a nursery. You're you're going to have to create your own tree by grafting some bud or a bud stick onto a rootstock plant or an existing citrus tree that you already have. And the only place to get this budwood is from the California Citrus Clonal Protection Program. You can learn a lot about grafting citrus and rooting citrus from videos from the Fruit Mentor, Dan Willey. He's got a great website. He's doing a lot of things with the citrus variety collection. He's trying to get new varieties of citrus introduced into California. Very active, really interesting guy. I highly recommend his site for learning about this. And he talks a lot about the Citrus Clonal Protection Program, so that he makes sure that everybody who visits his site is aware of that. It's a really interesting program. All citrus that comes into California has to go through their program to make sure it is disease-free before it gets released out to growers and to the public. The variety collection has over 1,000 varieties. Right now they have about 300 or over 300 varieties that are available through this program. And you as a homeowner, anybody can sign up for an account. It's free to have an account. And you can you have to order by the bud stick, and each bud stick has 6 buds on it. It's $1.50 per bud. It's double the price it was last year, unfortunately. And then they FedEx them to you. And interestingly, they actually charge you later. Who does that today? But anyway, it's really nice. You can get so many different varieties this way. This is where a lot of this material is coming from up in Central California at Lynn Cove Research and Extension Center, where they've now got these greenhouses to keep out the psyllids. The really popular varieties are being grown in grounds, so that larger trees, the less popular ones in containers. So this is a little controversial about whether we should share our citrus. The official CDFA guideline is that homegrown citrus should stay on your property. But what most people, including many experts I've heard, are saying is you just need to remove all of the green material from your fruit. Don't leave any leaves or stem on your fruit. Rinse it off, and then you can share your fruit. The psyllids don't lay their eggs on the fruit. They don't feed on the fruit. The fruit can contain the bacteria. It's harmless to us, but the psyllids aren't going to pick it up from the fruit. But they have been known to hitch a ride on fruit. So you want to make sure it's cleaned off and there's no psyllids on there before you share it. If you think you have the disease, the CDFA has a hotline and an email address you can contact them through. I used the pest hotline here, the email address, to contact them a couple months ago when I had one of my trees had a blotchy sort of look to the leaves, and I wasn't sure what it was. And they got back to me the very next day and said it was not Huanglongbing. I didn't think it was, but it's nice to get that confirmation from them. Unfortunately, I still don't know what's wrong with the tree. I've got to try to figure that out next. I haven't been able to find any comparable pictures anywhere to match it up. And then there's a lot of research going on. The only one I'm going to talk about, though, is this really interesting thing that UC Riverside came up with back in July. They announced it initially, and since then they've put out a scientific publication on that. And in the Australian finger lime, they found that this tree is very, very resistant to Huanglongbing disease. Infected trees really don't have any symptoms at all, and the bacteria doesn't seem to really be able to live in these trees. And so they figured out what it was in the trees that was antimicrobial. And it turned out to be a peptide, a chain of amino acids, sort of like a small protein. And they're able to synthesize that peptide and then treat trees that are infected. And if they can either spray it on the leaves or they can inject it into the trunk, and the tree recovers from the symptoms fairly quickly and begins to produce again. Unfortunately, it's not a cure. They have to keep reapplying it. But they think if it's applied to a uninfected tree, it'll keep it from getting infected in the first place. So really good news on the front there. It's not available yet. I'm hoping to see that soon because it's been over 6 months now since they initially announced it. If you want to learn more about the insect and disease, the UC IPM site's a great place to start. Lots of good information there. They have a pest note, which I think is 6 pages, or a 1-page quick tip. They're also, if you're interested in IPM in general, they have a public webinar coming up on Thursday that's open to the public, and I signed up for this one because they've made some additions to the website that they're gonna show us, and so you can click on that link to register if you're interested. Our grant also has an objective of promoting eating more fruits and vegetables, healthy diet. The My Plate program is a good place to start. This replaced the old food pyramid that I grew up with, and the My Plate keeps it really simple. They just say to have half your plate covered with fruits and vegetables, and that's the right amount. And then the USDA has given us a number of reasons why we should be eating fruits and vegetables. It provides nutrients that are typically underconsumed by Americans, things like vitamin A, C, and K, dietary fiber, and some minerals like magnesium and potassium. There are some compounds in certain fruits and vegetables that can help prevent chronic illnesses like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and some cancers. And then, of course, fruits and vegetables, if you eat them without adding fats and sugars, are a good part of a low-calorie diet. We also have various recipes. We hand these out at our events. This eatfresh.org is a really great place for healthy recipes, and they have recipes in other languages as well, at least in Spanish and Mandarin. And this is our website that we created for our grant. There's other information on there, links to some of the videos we've done on this topic. And so you're welcome. We'd like you to visit there. And then if you're just interested in citrus in general, the UC Riverside Citrus Variety Collection, like I said, there's lots of information there. It tends to be focused on growers. And so a little scientific-y, not so much for homeowners, but you can find so many different varieties of citrus there. And many of those are available in the Citrus Clonal Protection Program. California Rare Fruit Growers, that's a great group. They have 4 chapters in LA County. And lots of great information on fruit, all types of fruit. Nothing, don't get thrown by the rare fruit. It's any kind of fruit. Lots of people are just interested in oranges and apples. And then Tom Del Hotel, he's a member of the San Diego chapter of the California Rare Fruit Grower. He's also a professional arborist who specializes in fruit trees. And he's done a lot of great presentations for that group. And a couple of these are on citrus I gave you links to. Really good place to start. He goes over a lot of different varieties, really broad knowledge on the subject. And then Dan Willey, who I mentioned, the Fruit Mentor, he did a talk back in January for the Orange County chapter of the California Rare Fruit Growers, mostly about how to graft citrus. Anyway, it's a great video to look at as well, and introduce you to the CRFG. And I looked up a few places where we can get citrus. We cannot order citrus from out of state, so the online sources are all in-state online sources, like Four Winds Growers, one of the big ones. And then some of the local nurseries, and of course, a lot of the big box nurseries are still carrying citrus unless they're in the Huanglongbing quarantine. Any nursery in the quarantine is very unlikely to be carrying citrus. If they have citrus at the time the quarantine gets expanded around them, the CDFA comes out and they confiscate all of their citrus plants and destroy them. And so a lot of nurseries have just stopped carrying citrus just to get ahead of that and not get stuck in that situation where they lose all their plants. And this is some links to various parts of the Master Gardener program, our website, our social media pages, and our Victory Garden initiative. We're still doing some classes right now. I did my series back in March, so that's all done. I do it at the Pomona Fairplex. We're all online, all virtual this year. Hopefully in the fall, we'll be able to go back to in-person or maybe hybrid, where we do some in-person and some online. But I'll be doing that again at the Pomona Fairplex. And if you're interested just in getting more notices about what's happening with the Master Gardener program, you can click there to sign up for our newsletter and other announcements. So thank you very much. This is I wanted to show you the surviving, mother, the matriarch of the entire Washington Naval Orange industry. And this tree is still growing. It's nearly 150 years old, very, very old for an orange tree. You can't see it in the picture, but there was fruit on this tree in February when I visited. And you can actually see through the trunk because it doesn't really have the original trunk anymore. It just has all those replacement trunks. So a really interesting tree. But if you have other questions, you're welcome to email me at jcwarner@ucanr.edu. All right, well, that went a little longer than I planned, but do we have any questions, Master Gardeners?
I'm gonna unmute Jeff. How are you? Thank you, Jeff. You did an awesome job. There were a couple of questions from Lily. Lily, you can let me know if I've I've mispronounced your name. Is it possible to root cut air root, or is that a bunch of baloney? This was back regarding citrus? Root cuttings, air root. I only know grafting.
Air layering is often used to propagate plants that either you can't graft easily or you can't root the cuttings easily. So I don't know how easy it is to do with citrus. Citrus is actually fairly easy to graft and to. It's not super easy. It's not the easiest one to graft. There are some. There's some some particulars about it, but that's how all the commercial citrus is done. It's done through bud grafting for the most part. Bud grafting is a little harder to do than doing like a stem graft, like a cleft graft. That's what I mostly do because it's fairly easy. And so I'd recommend that before going to air layering. But I wish I knew more about it. I know some things like loquats and lychees and some things like that are hard to propagate other ways, and then they use air layering.
Well, somebody asked, do you have to worry about getting mulch and stuff from outside of the quarantine area?
I wouldn't expect so, but I never really looked into that, whether you're likely if they're most of the time the mulches are coming from street trees or parking lot trees. The last batch I got came from a Walmart, where it wasn't local to me, but they're not going to be, I guess there's a possibility there because they're not chipping it down to the size of a psyllid, and if they happen to trim an orange tree or a citrus tree, that there could be infected psyllids in there, but right now there's really no way to manage for that.
And they asked about soil and compost too. From
anything in particular about? Not moving it?
Yeah, about getting it from outside the quarantine area.
Oh, I don't think soil or compost would be a problem. The psyllids aren't going to be living in there. They don't lay their eggs in soil, and so that's not a problem.
And when is a good time to graft citrus?
Generally, when it's right about now is actually a good time. This is when you start grafting in Southern California. You want the temperatures to be in the 75 to 70 to 85 degree range. The Fruit Mentor website gives you that information about what the best temperature ranges are for the grass to heal and start growing. And so the whole day doesn't have to be in those temperatures, but you want a number of hours during the day within that temperature range for those grass to heal. So this is typically the time when you start doing your subtropical grafting, whether it's citrus or avocados or something else.
And someone asked about that they had heard, I think it was Lauren who asked that they had heard that grapefruit, it's really easy to cross-pollinate, and that's the reason why there are so many like hybrids with a sour taste. Is wanted to know if that's true or not.
Well, all the citrus does cross-pollinate very well, but cross-pollination doesn't change the fruit. It only changes the seeds. And so you take the seeds from something that's been cross-pollinated, you're getting a mix of the DNA from the parent plants, but the fruit is not affected in any way by the pollinator, the source of the pollen. I know a lot of people have that idea that, they have, like my friend, that's what they told me originally, who had the really sour, really bitter Mandarin. He thought it was because his neighbors were growing lemons and the pollen was coming over and pollinating his mandarins, but that's not the problem. The problem is he let the suckers grow up from the rootstock and they replaced his tree with rootstock, so he has terrible tasting fruit now. And this can happen to all sorts of plants. I had the same kind of question for somebody who had a white rose that now is producing red roses. And again, she thought, oh, my neighbor's red roses are messing up my white roses, but that's not it again. It was because the roses are also grafted, and they typically graft onto a red rose. And so that's what she was seeing, these rootstock roses, which are still attractive rose, unlike the citrus rootstock, which is horrible. Anything else?
Yes, and someone, they were given advice on how to make fruit sweeter, but also there's a possibility, because they had asked, is there any way you can, make your oranges taste sweeter? And that might be a cause too that person asked about. So is there a way if you can tell maybe which branches are coming from the rootstock, or if you still have any of the other from the graft growing?
Well, they're going to come up from the base of the tree. So, most of your citrus trees are growing like single trunk trees. And so that's, You don't expect multiple trunks, but there are some varieties that, maybe they did allow multiple trunks to come up from the graft. But all those branches need to come from above the graft. Anything coming from below the graft union is your rootstock, and so those should be removed. Even if they're large branches, you still want to cut those off, or cut them and graft to them. You can cut a stump and then over graft it, replacing the rootstock with a tasty variety of some kind. You don't have to necessarily destroy it, but yeah, you do want to cut that down. Citrus, the sweetness of fruit depends on a lot of different factors. A lot of it's climate, so being in an area where you're getting sufficient sun and heat. But it's also how you're caring for your trees, whether you're watering them enough, whether the trees getting enough sunlight. Sometimes you may want to thin the canopy a little bit. Those Sumo Mandarins I was telling you about, they do a lot of extra citrus, a lot of extra maintenance on those trees compared to regular citrus. They do a lot more pruning to thin the canopy to allow more sunlight in, so that fruit does become more sweet. Typically, you don't need to do that, but that one is a very high maintenance tree. It's one of the reasons why that fruit's expensive. Also, making sure your trees are getting a right amount of nutrients. And so if you're seeing symptoms of deficiencies in the leaves, that could affect the flavor of the fruit as well.
Okay. And one person commented that trifoliate leaves indicate rootstock. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, well, trifoliate is one of the main rootstocks. That's a different species. It's not citrus, but it's related, and it's graft compatible with many types of citrus. And so it has these little leaflets. It has a compound leaf with 3 leaflets on it. So if you see that, it's not one of your varieties, because none of the varieties that we want have that trifoliate leaf. And there are other things that are close. They've hybridized trifoliate with other things like sour oranges and things, and created rootstocks called citranges. And there's other ones, but they all kind of have that same compound leaf. So if you see that leaf, that's rootstock. Definitely not something you want. Now my Meyer lemon I told you about that I stunted by having too much fruit on it. The very first year, I put up a big sucker of a trifoliate branch, which I don't know if it was actually trifoliate or something related to it, but I cut it off and then I rooted it, and got maybe another 6 or 8 8 rootstock plants by doing that. And now those plants are ready for me to graft onto. So it's a good place to get rootstock.
Okay. And someone from the they're from the Bay Area, and they said, when should I do the thinning? Right now, as it has flowers, should I wait?
Not until the flowers have all, it's done flowering, the fruit's small, and I would let the fruit try to do it, wait until June when it will naturally drop a lot of that excess fruit anyway for you. And then wait and see what you're left over with. Thin at that point. If you think it's got too heavy a load at that point, but let the tree do its thing, it's going to drop a lot of that fruit naturally.
It says large housing project in Long Beach has huge orchard niche trimming. Can a MG team assist?
Well, master gardeners normally don't do volunteering that involves labor. Our objective is to teach other people how to trim their trees. We do orchard events periodically. You can put a request into the master gardeners. We have requests for volunteers. But you're asking someone to come out and show you how to do it, not to just do it for you.
Right. But go ahead and put the request in, because sometimes they have monthly meetings for master gardeners to also teach them how to trim trees and stuff. So we had a master gardener meeting at a church a couple years ago that they did end up getting most of their trees
True enough.
trimmed because of the master
gardeners. If you end up hosting one of our orchard team events, then you're going to get some master gardeners are out there doing the trimming, and then but we also want you to provide people that we're going to be teaching at the same time.
Exactly. So, it doesn't hurt to put a request in say, hey, I'll volunteer my site or something like that. You never know.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're not going to be able to do that for a little while yet. All our events are restricted to the number of people and how much spacing we need. We had one small orchard event last month, but it won't be too much longer, I hope, before we can get back to that.
Let's see. Someone says, I have a very young yuzu 1 year that is blossoming. Should I leave the blossoms or pick off?
Well, I'd go ahead and let it flower and set the small fruit. I mean, that's not hurting anything. And of course, you're providing, pollen for and nectar for the bees. I would not let it produce. I mean, it depends on the size of the tree, but I would not let it produce a lot of fruit the first year or two, just to let that plant get established. It takes a lot of the plant's resources, the sugars and things it's making in the leaves to develop the fruit. And that's not going then, it's not going into the roots and foliage development at that point. And so it's hard to wait. You probably want to let it make at least one so you can sample it, but not too many.
And Dennis said, I did spot a few Asian Psyllids on my citrus tree. However, the leaves look healthy. Should I be worried? And I did put the number for the hotline in the chat too. Just so
well, when you just see the insects, you want to find out where you are relative to the quarantine. And if you are in the quarantine or near it, there's of course a very good chance those insects may be carrying the disease, and in which case they may have already affected your tree. You're not going to know for a while. So the best thing to do is try to control the insects through one of the methods we were talking about. Spray your trees with something soft insecticides, control the ants, and then grow lots of beneficial insectary plants to try to manage the insects so they don't become a problem. You're really not going to know for a while whether it's infected. I don't think calling the CDFA, you don't really need to contact the CDFA just because you cited the insects. The insects are all over Southern California right now. And so they're not going to come out and do anything in that case. If you think your tree is actually infected because you see symptoms, that's the time to contact them.
I was also going to say, since you posted Fruit Mentor, I've seen it myself for Dennis. If you want to check out Fruit Mentor, he has a conversation with Monique Rivera, who is one of the chief, I think, entomologists at UC Riverside. And he has a long interview, well, not a very long interview, but he has an interview with her about how to treat citrus trees once you think they might be infected with the psyllid, how
Dan did a number of interviews all around Huanglongbing disease, talking to different UC Riverside researchers, including Monique. Monique's been my advisor on this project for the last year. She's an entomologist at UCR, and we have a good presentation on the subject on our YouTube channel. That Monique has her own way of talking about this, where she compares a lot of the aspects of Huanglongbing to COVID-19, showing the parallels. So a little different than I do it, and so that's worth looking at if you really want to know more about this disease.
Yeah.
Well, it says is whitewashing beneficial, or is it just marketing?
Absolutely, yes.
No, whitewashing is definitely beneficial, and especially any exposed bark on trees like citrus, avocados, and other trees, figs. I found on figs as well. They have thin bark, and so if it's directly exposed to the sun in hot areas, it burns the bark, and that damage never fully heals and becomes a place that insects can attack your tree. And so I always whitewash my young trees, and because they don't have a very big canopy yet to protect themselves. But once the canopy is filled in, you don't have to continue, whitewashing branches that are protected during the summer. And we have those heat spikes, 115 degrees. They'll do a lot of damage to the leaves, but the leaves get replaced. It's not permanent. But if they damage the bark, that is permanent. It doesn't ever fully repair itself.
So Jeff, will you kind of talk about the triangle of mitigation that you want to keep? You have to mitigate three things, right? So you have to mitigate. The tree has to be healthy. The tree has to not be available to disease. And if you don't mitigate, two of the three on the triangle of mitigation of a disease, then your tree becomes much more available to being under.
That's a general
accessible to disease.
Yeah, that's a general IPM principle, yes. Integrated pest management.
Yeah, talk about that.
You're looking. They have a triangle. They draw a triangle. One side is like the host plant, so you have to have the right host plant. Then you have to have the pathogen or insect has to be present, and then the conditions have to be right for these two. And if you have all three of these, they intersect, and then you have the problem. So if you can eliminate one of these things, either don't have the insects, don't have the conditions, don't have the host, you don't have that problem. So with this, of course, if you have citrus, you have the host plant. If the insects are present, you have them. You can't really eliminate it through conditions. You have to treat to control the insects. But again, the best thing to do, like I found some psyllids on my tree, not this last February, but a year ago February, and I have a mature Washington navel tree, saw the trunk of it. I went out there one morning. I found 3 or 4 adult psyllids and a few eggs. The eggs were hard to see, but I went and looked where the adults had flown away from, and I could see where they had laid some eggs. And by the next day, they were all gone. I've never seen them since. And what I did see the next day when I went out is I saw some adult green lacewings flying around in my citrus tree. Now, green lacewing adults don't control the insects. They're not predators. They feed on nectar and pollen, but their larvae do. They may look like a little caterpillar, but they're actually larvae that are predators, and they will attack the psyllids. So I can't prove that's how it happened, but that's a possible scenario that controlled them. And I have sweet alyssum growing near this tree. I keep other types of good plants that are good for attracting beneficial insects.
Does a multi-variety cocktail citrus, is that a good way to go?
Yeah, that's a fun thing, having multiple varieties grafted onto one tree. I mean, that's what I'm doing as a hobbyist. I'm going out there and grafting other things. I grafted several things onto a plum tree this year, a peach and an almond and an apricot, because they're all fairly graft compatible, even though they're different. And so I'll have a cocktail stone fruit tree next year once those take. The problem with multi-grafted trees is that they are harder to maintain than regular fruit trees. Typically, one variety will be much more vigorous than the other varieties, and they tend to take over the whole tree. I bought one that was already pre-grafted, a plum tree that had 4 varieties on it from Dave Wilson, one of my favorite fruit tree growers, Dave Wilson Nurseries. And one of those varieties was called Methley, and this variety just took over the whole tree. The branch that's coming off, the grafted branch, is like 5 times as big as the next largest branch. And so I have to really aggressively prune the Methley branch in order to allow the rest of the varieties to have any space in the canopy so they can get some sun and develop. So I don't recommend them as your first fruit tree. You're gonna need to learn how to prune and manage them. Otherwise, you'll be down to one variety. In fact, one of the 5 varieties on this tree failed in the first winter, and it was kind of a weird tree. It had 2 that were probably grafted a year before I bought it, and then 3 more varieties that were grafted, probably a few months before I bought it. And the 3 little grafts, one of those failed right away. One is barely grown at all, and really none of them have grown very well. None of them have produced fruit for me. I've just gotten fruit off the 2 bigger branches and mostly off that Methley branch, which unfortunately is the least favorite plum on there. They're okay, they're not a great plum, so I'm really disappointed in the result on that one. But I also have a multi-grafted pluot that had 4 varieties, and they're much closer to being in balance, and so that one's been much easier to maintain. So it's hard to get that information. Dave Wilson's site didn't say anything about the Methley being this really aggressive variety, so I didn't know that was going to happen until it happened.
Okay, we have a few more questions.
Okay.
Mike asked a while ago, and I have to go find it again because it keeps. But he knows you did the boric acid things around your citrus trees. He wants to know if it's good to do that around vegetable gardens too. And if I didn't explain that right, Mike, could you please retype your question?
The boric acid is considered one of the least toxic insecticides for ants. If you're familiar with borax, it's a laundry additive. It's a natural product that gets mined. I know they have a borax mine up in the Death Valley area, and it just if you want to make your own solution, I think the link I gave you there was to a UC ANR IPM note on ants. And what they recommend is making a 1% solution. That's actually weaker than what they sell you in the market. Like if you buy Taro brand ant baits, those are made with boric acid, and they're like, I think they're 5% solution. So boric acid, you can make your own 1% solution. It gives it more time to get back to the nest and kill the colony rather than just killing the ant that collected it. But I think they do it commercially, the stronger ones, because people want to see results. They want to see dead ants. And so they put in the stronger stuff, but UC gives you a formula. They give you a recipe for making a 1% solution that you can use, and you mix it in with sugar. So most of these ants are attracted to sugar. There are some ants that like fats, and so you might want to mix it into peanut butter or something like that. But typically, a sugar solution is your first step. The first thing to try.
Okay, Pat has planted a citrus labeled blood orange, but it's not. The fruit looks like a lemon, but it's not sour and has no lemon flavor. How can I find out what it is?
It's tough to identify trees, especially by looking at the fruit. There are some, there's like a sweet lime that actually they turn yellow as well. They call them a lime, but they're not really lime. They don't have any lime flavor. They just taste like sugar water. Some people actually love those. I don't like them because they don't really have any flavor to me. If they actually had a lemon or lime that was sweet and tastes like lemonade or limeade, I would love it. But most of them don't have that combination. They usually they don't have either any citrus flavor at all, they're just sweet, or they actually aren't that sweet in the first place, even though they call them a sweet variety. What happens is nursery plants get mislabeled. People move the labels or something happened at the grower, and it's not uncommon at all to end up with a tree that different tree than you bought. And so there's not much you can do. Maybe bring a piece of fruit to the nursery and see if the person that sold it to you can identify it.
She says, we have a jasmine and honeysuckle in our long driveway. Meyer lemon is on opposite side of driveway in the middle. Would that provide enough pollinator to deter ACP?
Well, I don't know every insectary plant, how good certain ones are. I would just say, the more flowering plants you have that are providing, pollen and nectar for beneficial insects, the better off you are. There's no real recipe for this. I would look up, there are articles you can find on insectary plants where they recommend different plants for different types of insects. So I don't know about those particular plants, but you can see whether maybe your plants are on that list, and then you'll know whether some are better for attracting bees, some are better for attracting butterflies, which aren't going to help with insect control, but then other ones are better for attracting things like ladybugs and these parasitic wasps that are so helpful.
I would also suggest keeping your lemon trees pruned to the point where there's a lot of air in the middle, because then there's nowhere for those insects to hide.
Yeah, that's true. You want good airflow through all your fruit trees. You don't want to open too much because you don't want sunburn on the branches. But yeah, in citrus, you don't normally have to open it up very much, but a few cases you might have to. It's a real common problem in other types of fruit trees where there's too much growth and you have to remove some of it to open the tree up. And then it allows the beneficials to find all the other all their prey. And remember, you're not just helping to keep down the psyllids, you're also helping with scale and aphids and other problems you can have on your citrus.
I think we've covered everything, but if we haven't, if you've asked a question and I've missed it, can you please really quickly post it again? I'm sorry about that if
Well, there was just one, and I answered it, but maybe we can get you guys' take on it. They want several varieties of citrus, and was wondering if they could use seeds. And I told them that seeds don't normally breed true.
Oh.
Well, citrus is actually interesting on this front because many types of citrus have what they call nuclear embryos in a seed. So what that means is inside of a single seed, you'll have more than a single embryo. You'll have the one embryo that was created through fertilization, a normal embryo that's going to be a cross between your tree and whatever pollinated it. And so it won't grow true to the tree you have. So if you have a Meyer lemon and you grow it from a seed, you might have two seedlings come up, or even more than 2. One of those will be the sexually created one that's going to be different than the Meyer lemon. Any other ones will be these nuclear embryos, which are clones of the Meyer lemon. And so you actually can grow true to type citrus from seeds. And often the nuclear embryos grow faster than the other one. And so you can actually separate them that way, knowing that. But that's a little tricky. You know, I haven't grown citrus from seed, but I've grown a ice cream bean plant from seed. And it does the same thing. I got, 2, 3, 4 different seedlings from each seed. And but it wasn't that easy to identify.
Right, and I did say it depends on the pollen source, because if it's from pollen from the same tree, a similar tree, you'll probably get.
It'll be more like itself, but even a tree that self-pollinates, it remixes the chromosomes. You don't end up with the exact same mix that the parent had, because parents all have 2 sets of chromosomes and they get recombined in different ways. And so you don't get a clone from, you never get a clone from sexual reproduction.
Okay. Oh, and there is another question. Why do leaves curl up on lime and orange trees?
Well, there could be a number of reasons that, that could be a drought issue. There could be other problems with the tree. I don't know if that's a normal for any of these trees. Certain like things like leaf miners and things will cause the leaves to curl and look bad, even though it doesn't really do that much actual damage. So you have to send pictures in. You could try our helpline and send them pictures, close-ups of the problem. Tell them as much as you know about the tree, whether it's it's been healthy otherwise, been productive, exactly what you know about it. That'll help a lot. It can be very hard to answer these questions without a lot of information to go with it. Well, thanks everybody. By the way, I'm involved in the LA County Fair each year with the Master Gardeners, and we're not going to have a fair again this year. They're going to do something. They're going to call it a mini fair. I don't know what's going to involve, but next year is the 100th anniversary of the LA County Fair, and so that's going to be a big event. And the Master Gardeners are there every day of fair. So hopefully, you can meet some of you in person next year.
Jeff, I can start with one of the questions from Dennis. He asks, is it a good idea to prune grapefruit because it has so much fruit?
Well, you would try to prune after you've harvested the fruit. There isn't a particular time when you have to prune citrus like you would with peach or something where you want to do dormant pruning. With citrus, you're just trying to find a time when you're doing the least amount of, losing the least amount of fruit. Mostly you're going to be doing it for size control, skirting, that sort of thing. But I would wait till you've harvested it, at least most of it.
I've got the follow-up question.
Okay, Kelsey?
Not a follow-up question to that exact one, but the next one that came throughout the presentation is, are there any recommended all-in-one fertilizers?
I don't recommend, Master Gardeners, we typically don't recommend a particular product. I don't have it right in front of me. There's a really common citrus avocado fertilizer that's granulated. It's supposed to be sort of slow release. You can get, like a Home Depot, anywhere else. It's pretty inexpensive. There are probably better options. There are lots of organic options, but I don't have a list in front of me to recommend anything.
Jeff, I'm going to follow up on, I think it was Dennis's question. He's asking about on a very established tree to reduce size. You said something about that. Can you elaborate on that? He wants to know what's the best time to prune a very established tree to reduce its size.
We've got other experts here, but if one of our orchard experts wants to weigh in, you're welcome to. I haven't done a lot of citrus pruning, except at the Master Gardener workshops with Herb McAletter. So Herb is here. Maybe he'll weigh in on pruning citrus.
I can make a comment if I unmute myself. Yeah, for the fertilizer, Master Nursery is a one and all for citrus, or Lily Miller. They have an ideal mix for our area. So that's a single fertilizer that you can use. As far as pruning is, we have a fairly large citrus orchard and a mixed stone fruit orchard. And over 30 years, they've been pruned. Citrus has been pruned on 5 occasions. So citrus doesn't need to be pruned. If you prune citrus, you're going to weaken it because it doesn't go dormant. It doesn't translocate the nutrients to the roots. So you're taking away nutrients that the tree has produced when you're pruning it. And as Jeff said, you can prune suckers and vigorous growth. And the lemons, you have to trim every year because it has these very, very large sprouts that shade the rest of the tree. But as far as grapefruit and all the other citrus, once every 5 years, you can prune it a bit. The mandarins, you only prune it to try and get a varied number of shoots so that you don't have such a difficult time with alternate bearing. So I think pruning citrus is something that's done very infrequently. And pruning I don't think we've ever pruned a grapefruit, even though we've had them growing 15, 20 years. They produce the fruit continually on the same canopy. And so that's really shouldn't be a big problem unless if it's a very large tree, you're going to have to be very careful in pruning it down because you're removing a lot of its nutrients.
Oh, thanks, Herb.
We have another question about root suckers to be air layered, to be grafted. Am I saying that right?
Okay, so they want to propagate the root suckers and then use them for grafting later?
That's how the question reads, yes.
Okay, well, I've done that myself. My Meyer lemon put out a root sucker right away, which was some kind of a trifoliate orange. I don't know which one. But I just cut it off and I was able to root it. I cut it in about 6 pieces and then rooted them indoors. You have to, learn a little bit about rooting. I used, rooting hormone and had it indoors on bottom heat with plant lights on top of it, and they all grew very well. And so now those are growing in my backyard in pots, waiting for me to get some budwood from the Citrus Clonal Protection Program, which I plan to do next month. So apparently the ideal time to graft citrus is when the temperatures are in the 70 to 85 degree range. That's when they do the most healing, at least according to the Fruit Mentor. And so, this month would be okay, but I think April will be even better. So I haven't tried layering. So layering is a different technique altogether, where you're either you're leaving the citrus, you're leaving the branch on there, but you're girdling it and trying to get it to form roots. You have to cover, put something like sphagnum moss or something around it, and then cover it up. That can be a good way. A lot of things that don't root well, they use air layering for, but citrus roots reasonably well. So I think that's probably a faster way to go.
Looks like Joni asked for clarification. Are we talking about using the suckers from the rootstock?
Yeah, almost all the suckers are likely to be rootstock on most citrus. I don't know, something like a finger lime may not be grafted, in which case that would be a finger lime variety that same as that you're harvesting from the tree. But most of our citrus is grafted, so yeah, it's going to be rootstock.
And then a related question, any sources for mature rootstock ready to be grafted?
I haven't looked for citrus rootstock. I've gotten rootstock for other fruit trees. I'm sure there are. Maybe Herb would know sources that he can mention.
Very few sources, and the flying dragon is exceedingly difficult to graft. So it's not sold in retail stores. I think a lot of the people who now, particularly with Huanglongbing, who propagate citrus, grow their own rootstock. But I've never seen a nursery that's selling, and we buy them from all over the country, but I've never seen anybody who's selling citrus rootstock. I think the way Jeff told you, if you can propagate the flying dragon, then you can plant your citrus in pots, because that's a dwarfing rootstock. But if you fail first time, you can try again, because it's notoriously difficult to graft. But that's probably the best way, is to grow your own from the way Jeff described it, from suckers. because they grow very vigorously. We've seen orchards here where people didn't know about the orchards, and when we came to look at them, the orchard had been taken over by rootstock, and that's why they got no fruit. There was one up in the Santa Monica Mountains at a big camp. So these grow very, very vigorously, but the grafting of them is a little difficult. We'll see what Jeff just does when he grafts his.
Well, this is my second time trying to graft citrus, and my first time was a bust. So
just keep doing it, because that's great rootstock, but it's notorious.
Yeah. Well, I haven't tried it on this one. I tried grafting to an existing tree. I have a cocktail grapefruit that I tried grafting to, and I didn't know much about what I was doing. I did some chip buds, and none of them took. So I'll try again. Part of the problem was I did it like in June, right before we had a heat wave. And I think they just all dried up before they had a chance to take. So that's why I want to do them these potted plants, which I can move into shade if I need to, and do it in April before, we're not likely to have a really 100-degree day in April.
Jeff, there's just one more point. To be very practical, citrus is great because citrus and avocado are things that are climatized to our area. That's what we should be growing everywhere. So it's a shame that we're in such a pickle right now. But the citrus groves were threatened once before with a deadly disease that nobody could control. That was the cottony cushiony scale back in the 1880s. But that was completely controlled by a biological agent, by the Vidalia beetle that we imported from Australia. And it was the very first example of biological control in the U.S. And it was done on the citrus groves, and it saved them. And you'll see very, very few instances of that cottony cushiony scale now, because the insect acclimatized to our area. The only disease that really bothers the citrus is the Phytophthora, both in the roots and in the canopy. And that's the only thing that'll affect the fruit really in our coastal area. And if you trim the skirt to about 12 to 14 inches, even though it's a productive area, you can completely eliminate the Phytophthora from bouncing up in rain. That's how it gets into the canopy of the tree. And it's very rare. I think in 30 years, we've sprayed every couple of years only with horticultural oil, no other insecticides. And the orchards are beautiful and healthy and very productive. So the benefit, and so what Jeff mentioned about keeping the ants out of the tree is critical, because on the coastal area, not inland, but on the coastal area, our beneficials can completely control almost all of the citrus diseases, the scale, the orange worms, except for root Phytophthora. And what he mentioned is really critical, that you grow the tree on a little bit of a berm, because the Phytophthora, even though they call it a fungus, it's an oophyte. It's a fungus, but it swims. And if there's any water that's around that tree, the oophyte can move around. It has a little flagellum. So it's a motile organism. And once that gets in the tree, there's no real way to protect it. So I think if you can keep control of those two things, the only thing you have to worry about is Huanglongbing. And that a lot of people ask the question, how am I going to do it? In the citrus orchards, they have it under control. But if you try and do it the way they recommend, you won't be able to have very productive stone fruit trees or apple trees, because they use a systemic imidacloprid, which is the neonicotinoid that may cause hive collapse. So to protect the citrus, you're really sacrificing your bees. And the way we do it is to use pyrethrin or oils, like Jeff said. But when you see the first flush, that's when the insect is going to be there. It's not going to be on the older leaves. It's not going to be any time but when those little leaves flush out. And you have to be very vigilant. And if you see them, pyrethrin or permethrin, which is approved for organic control, will wipe them out. So you can protect them, particularly on the coastal area. But it's a very practical solution to this problem. But if you try and control it the way the orange grows do, you're probably going to be sacrificing the other fruit in your orchard.
Yeah, I definitely want to keep the bees healthy and and numerous.
All right, Jeff, we have several more questions.
Okay.
Marianne's asking, where's a good place to have an orange tree identified? She says the tree's got a beautiful orange on the outside. Inside is sour, bitter, has many seeds. It's also next to a lime tree.
Rootstock.
Yeah, rootstock, as Herb was mentioning. It's not because of cross-pollination. A lot of times people think when something gets pollinated by something else, it changes the fruit. That doesn't happen. It changes the seeds that are formed. You'll get a hybrid seed, but the fruit should be the same as the mother plant. And so if that fruit is bitter, it's almost almost assuredly it's a rootstock fruit that you're eating. Or you're probably not eating it, but you've tried it. I had a friend who's down in Anaheim who had a citrus tree with multiple trunks coming up from the base, and he begged me to try the fruit, and I did, and it was horrible. And it was because it was no longer the Mandarin that he had planted there; it was the rootstock that Mandarin was grafted to, and the Mandarin was pretty much gone at that point. It was just rootstock.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Next question is from Brian. Some of my dwarf lemon flesh is purplish in color. Is that normal?
I've never heard of that, having a purplish lemon flesh. That's different.
No, the flesh of the leaf.
The flesh.
Yeah.
Oh, that may be normal. I'm not sure about that. I have just the one Meyer lemon, and its flesh does not look purplish, I don't think. But I mean, if the flesh matures and the leaves are your typical, dark green, then I don't think it's anything wrong. It's probably not a nutrient deficiency. It may just be the color of the juvenile growth. I don't know.
This is maybe someone's asking why their Mineola tangelo is so sour, and that might be the same answer that you gave for the prior question.
Yeah, it shouldn't be. So you're not talking about a grocery store fruit. I assume it's a backyard fruit, which in case, again, it shouldn't be sour, and that's most likely rootstock.
We had a request to chat about mother trees and scions and what you are looking for.
Mother trees and scions. I mean, I would just pick varieties, things that you want to grow. So things that get you excited, something you may not be able to get in the grocery store. That's what I look for, is things that I don't normally buy that I want to grow in my yard. So you can check, if you take a look at the citrus variety collection or the list that the Citrus Clonal Protection Program puts out, you'll see a huge number of types of citrus. And then you can click on the links and they'll show you some information about each of those types. It's not really meant for the home gardener, unfortunately. It's not quite that nicely packaged, but it gives you a great starting place. And there's so many different types. That one article I told you about, the old and new types of citrus, the tried and true and the something new, it's a really good place to start. Lots of really neat varieties there that you may not have heard of. And pretty much everything on that list is available through the Citrus Clonal Protection Program. They have, with 300 some varieties, that you're not likely to not find what you're looking for.
We have a question about, it looks like irrigation. Maybe some of you can help me out with the question. We have several citrus on a steep slope with loose soil. Found putting in a 2-inch pipe 2 feet long to water better. Is this a good idea?
Well, on a slope, you just want to apply your water slowly. And so it has a chance to get absorbed and doesn't just run off. So whatever method you choose to do that, I think on a slope, I would prefer something like drip irrigation, but just something that's not putting out the water very fast. And so it doesn't run off.
Jeff, I might make a comment. The idea of doing a soil test, as Jeff showed you, is really important if you're planting citrus or avocados. The stone fruit trees you can manage by amending the soil, but the citrus and avocado, you have to know what your soil looks like. Like Jeff has to water every few days, but we water twice a month. Anybody on the coast that has clay soil should be watering deeply twice a month at the most, because you don't want any water to pool, and the clay soil is negatively charged, so it holds the water molecules, and you've got a whole bunch of moisture in that soil. If you do it every day, you're going to be at what's called field capacity all the time, and these organisms that live on the surface of water and water that pools are going to be very aggressive. So the soil you have is really critical in deciding what type of watering you're going to do and how you're going to do it. Practically, you could take a hanger that's about 2 feet long and straighten it out and push it into the soil. If you can push it in a foot or two, then you've got adequate water. If you can't push it in, then especially with clay soil where it's very slippery, and that's the way to test it. If you don't use any other kind of watering electronic meter, is to try and push a steel rod down into the ground after you water it and see if you're getting down to the root zone. And remember, as Jeff said, the roots are pretty shallow in citrus. They don't have a huge taproot going down. Most of the trees that I grafted end in a blind end with roots coming out, rather than trees that are grown from seed that have a long taproot going down. So the thing is to do the watering and then test it and see. But on the coast, once every 2 weeks, deep watering for several hours per tree is all you want to do.
Okay, Master Gardeners, do we have any other questions waiting?
There are several. I wanted to be conscious of time. It's 8:20, so I just wanted to check in.
Well, we can go a little longer. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, people are slowly disappearing, so they can.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we can keep going then. So the next question is a fern-like plant keeps growing on my Meyer lemon. I can't get rid of it, even though I've spent a lot of time digging the roots and cutting it out of the tree. Is this a common thing to happen?
I don't think that's common. I'm not sure what that plant is, unless it's something like a wild asparagus or something. When they say fern-like plant, I'm not quite sure. Herb, is that one you know?
Well, I didn't catch that.
It's a fern-like plant that's growing up into the tree that's really difficult to get rid of, even after she's dug the roots out.
Okay, well, I think she just said she thinks it is wild asparagus. So
okay.
I've had that problem, but it was pretty easy to dig out and get rid of. I'm not sure what why would it keep coming back. One of the things you can do is to get rid of a really stubborn weed is you can cut the top off it near the soil and then paint on a little Roundup. That'll really go in there and kill that plant without affecting the plants around it.
Okay. And then someone is asking, I purchased a Meyer lemon tree in the summer of last year. It had lots of pea-sized fruit that never got any larger. They eventually turned yellow, so I pulled them off. Any idea why this happened and how I can prevent it from happening in the years to come?
Well, I would guess either watering or nutrition. When a tree is stressed, it doesn't develop its fruit properly. And so on a young tree, you normally don't want to let it grow very much fruit anyway. So I would pull those off, maybe leaving a couple so you can try the fruit. So you can try the fruit, but normally the tree develops a lot better. Meyer lemons are very productive. I have one that's about 3 years old, and it's a tiny tree. It's only about 18 inches tall, and it never grew the first year because I let it produce like 20 fruit. And they got the full size, but the tree just wouldn't grow. All the energy was going into the fruit. And so I would recommend taking most, if not all, the fruit off for a couple of years. And then if it's just, if the fruit aren't developing, it's got to be something to do with nutrition or watering.
So our next question.
Is it growing in a pot or is it growing in ground? Is that Meyer lemon growing in a pot?
She didn't say. She'll have to, oh, here it is. It's in a pot. Okay, that's so how big a pot is the question?
Yeah, the thing to remember is that Meyer lemons grow beautifully in a pot. We've had ones growing 20 years and they're filled with fruit, but they exhaust the soil in the pot pretty quickly because they put out a lot of fruit. And so you've got to replenish the nitrogen. You've got to use At least for a pot tree, at least a half a pound of fertilizer a year. And then Jeff showed you the citrus growers mix. It has the magnesium and iron and the other nutrients. But in a pot, a citrus has to be fed because it produces a lot of fruit and it's green all year round, doesn't go dormant. And so the pot soil is exhausted within a few years.
Herb, she said she's growing it in a 5-gallon pot. What size would you recommend is more optimal?
Well, a 36-inch pot the tree will grow there for many, many years, 36 inches across.
Okay, but that's bigger than a 5-gallon.
Yeah, no, a 5-gallon is what you buy in the Home Depot or the nursery, and they expect you to transplant that when you get home.
Yeah, not everybody. Yeah, if you're trying to grow on a patio or something, you may not have room for a 36-inch pot. So it's how you think it would do? Okay, like in a 15 or 20-gallon for a while.
Yeah, a lot depends on how you supply the nutrients. That's really the key. You may have a very good planting mix, but the nutrients in that are only good for the first part of the season, or maybe one season at the very most. Then it depends on you supplying everything that tree needs, watching the leaves for any color change, and using something like citrus growers mix that's a blend of all the minerals that the trees need in our area. And also a fertilizer that's developed for Southern California, like the citrus and avocado mix of Lily Miller or Master Nursery. And then you're doing well. You'll see the tree really flourish. But it's got to be in February and May. You need to put on the fertilizer, and you need to also add the minerals, because the soil, even in a big pot, after a few seasons, is down to pretty negligible. And the tree can't put out any more roots into healthier soil. So that's kind of critical. For some of the flower pots that you grow, you're not producing a lot of fruit, and so you're not wasting or using a lot of minerals that the tree is kind of putting in the fruit and its new leaves. So you have to think of nutrition. If the tree is getting adequate nutrition and it's alive, it'll produce fruit.
Well, let's try a couple. You have time for a couple more, Jessica and Kelsey?
Yeah, we do have, the questions keep coming strong. Everyone's very curious. We have a few more questions.
Okay. Try to go through quickly.
You guys are captivating the audience. Our next question I have on my list: my navel oranges began to over-ripen seemingly because of overwatering. Is it problematic to spread Epsom salt at the base of the tree as a means of drying it out?
Well, that's unique. I've never heard of using Epsom salts like that. I would just let it dry out on its own. I don't think I'd treat it with Epsom salts. That's going to be a lot of magnesium you're applying to your tree, which it may not need. And so I don't think that's a good approach. But I've never heard of that. Maybe it's something that's Herb may have heard of.
Yeah, if the tree is getting too much water, the fruit will crack. I don't know whether unless it's in a pot and the hole is plugged, you have very, very poor drainage. That really shouldn't be a problem. And also, when the fruit is over ripened, it regreens. So the skin, after about 2 or 3 months on the tree, if you're giving it adequate water and sunlight, the Valencia and it doesn't happen so much with the navel, but the Valencia will regreen. And the color is not a good indication of its ripeness. In fact, in the warmer climates in southern Florida and where these trees grow in the tropics or the semi-tropic, they never turn orange. The color orange is completely dependent on very cold nights. And the way that the ripening is determined commercially is by measuring the sugar and acid balance. And if the fruit is green, it's colored. They're all colored before they're sold. They're dyed. So just think of it. The normal way that the fruit grows is to turn orange in areas where there are very cold nights, and to stay green in areas that have warm nights. And also, after a while on the tree, the fruit has a tendency to regreen. it forms more chlorophyll in the skin. It doesn't affect the flavor, but people get very concerned about what's happening. So I think you may be watching a physiologic reaction in the fruit that is not critical.
Well, I have one. Jonathan is asking, is it advisable to transplant my Meyer lemon tree from a whiskey barrel into the ground?
Well, I mean, if it's growing well in a whiskey barrel, that's almost big enough, according to the Herb's recommendation of a 36-inch pot. Those are pretty close, and probably will grow like that for years, as long as it's productive and healthy and you're fertilizing, as Herb's mentioned. I don't think I'd put it in the ground unless you just wanted to put it in the ground. You know, trees in the ground typically are going to grow bigger than trees in pots. You know, their root systems get to be more extensive. They have access to more water and nutrients. And so if you really want to get a tree that's producing more, then going in the ground is always a good idea.
Gina has a question about leaf miner. She has it on her Valencia Orange, her blood orange, tangerines, and her Mexican lemon. Is this going to affect my fruit? What's the best way to prevent it or deal with it?
Well, most of the time we just ignore it. It's more cosmetic damage. This is another invasive insect. I think it's a tiny moth. It's hard to treat because once the egg is hatched and the larva has tunneled into between the layers of the leaf, you really can't get to it with your pyrethrin or insecticidal soaps or whatever you're going to use. So you really have to treat it at just the right time when the adults are active and laying eggs. Most of the time it's just cosmetic. Some people ask if they should take the leaves off, and I say no, because the leaves are still producing, they're still photosynthesizing and doing what they need to do, even though they don't look good. It's just something, everybody has leaf miners in California. It's just ubiquitous here. And it doesn't affect the fruit quality unless you have an unusually bad infestation. It's not, your tree should still produce just as well as it would without it.
Jonathan is asking a follow-up question. He says he has his Mandarin tree sheds all of its leaves in last November. His Mandarin tree shed all of its leaves in the course of 2 weeks, but no leaves, but lots of blossoming buds everywhere. Why would this happen, and should this be a concern?
That shouldn't happen. I don't think citrus is evergreen. It should not be dropping all its leaves at once. That sounds like a problem with, I don't know what it would do that, extreme drought, or what would cause that. I've never seen that on citrus. I've seen them lose leaves, but not like that.
Yeah, I would agree with Jeff. Citrus, even though it's evergreen, is a deciduous tree. The leaves may last 2 years rather than every year, but the citrus is constantly renewing its leaves. If you watch avocado and citrus on the bottom, they have a big mound of leaf litter. So the tree does dehisce its leaves regularly, and if it looks like it's bare, it means it's not regrowing the leaves. So this is a problem of nutrition. The tree should be growing leaves all the time. Well, at least during its flourish period in February and maybe in May. But if the tree defoliates and doesn't regreen, then it's a nutrition problem. Even trees that have Phytophthora usually continue to produce their leaves. But this is a problem of production because the tree naturally loses its leaves all through the year. And its natural physiology is to replace them as they're lost. So you have to look at the nutrition. You may be missing something.
Okay, I have a question that came out on earlier in the talk. So if a lemon tree that was purchased from a nursery that specializes in citrus only bears what appears to be limes, is that because the rootstock took over the grafted plant?
Well, how long have you had it? If it's rootstock, it's going to be additional trunks that have come up from the base. So if you just have a nice single trunk citrus like you normally would have, it's probably not the rootstock unless you've had that tree for a very long time and the rootstock has replaced the main tree. So I don't know what, if they're limes and they're not ripening, or some limes will turn yellow. Are they supposed to be lemons or limes? I forget which way it was what they thought they had.
They were supposed to be lemons, but it was only growing what appeared to be limes.
So they're not okay. Well, yeah, it's possible the nursery had a mislabeled tree. That happens a lot.
That's a mislabeled tree.
Yeah,
most likely.
Okay, and then
you know that citrus forms sports. Citrus do undergo genetic mutation very frequently, much more frequently than other trees. In fact, the whole Naval Orange industry is based on a citrus variant that occurred on a normal citrus tree. So citrus trees will put out different kinds of fruit on one single branch. It's not uncommon. So just keep that in mind. Very often you may see something that looks like a lime on a citrus tree, and it's called a sport. And it's one of the characteristics of citrus that they have these sports, which are very localized areas of genetic mutation. And the fruit may be quite different. It may have something to do with pollen or its genetics, but it's very common to citrus all over the world. And that's the origin of the Naval Orange, because there's never been a seed to plant. So every single one of them comes from a sport, a little tree that grows on a branch. So you may be seeing that, but it sounds like the tree may be mislabeled if all the fruit looks like limes.
Yeah.
All right, thanks. The next question is, someone told me that a 12-inch diameter around the trunk should be pruned out. Have you heard of that? Is this a good idea?
I'm not quite sure what you mean by a 12-inch diameter around the trunk. I mean, that's good advice for mulch distance from the trunk. You don't want to pile up your mulch too close to the trunk. But pruning, not trying to picture what that means exactly. I'm not quite picturing it.
Okay, so if the person who asked that can clarify in the chat, that would be great. And then just a couple more, 3 more, 4 more. How extensively should my grapefruit tree be picked, as I have hundreds of fruit on it year round, which fall to the ground regularly?
Well, I mean, you're picking for so that it doesn't fall to the ground. So you got fruit you can share or use. So that's the problem with a large productive tree, is that you often have more fruit than you need for your home. That's when you start sharing it.
Okay,
one advantage of citrus is that citrus is in contradistinction to all the other trees we grow, apples, peaches, pears, plums. Citrus fruit can stay on the tree easily without changing for 3 months. So you have a very, very long storage period, and a lot of nurseries, a lot of orchards store their citrus fruit on the tree. It doesn't begin to get dry or change in character until after about 3 months. So you have a very long period of time to, find neighbors and friends and family and relatives who will benefit from it. But it does keep for a long time on the tree. And sometimes the ones that fall are the sweetest. You just have to get there before the squirrels do.
Yeah.
We have clarification on that question, the prior question. So the person, it was orange trucks are often, and this is an Ojai, she's seen this, are painted with a white ring. Is that a good or recommended?
Well, whitewashing the trunks and major branches, especially if they're exposed to the direct sun, especially in inland areas, is a really good recommendation for orange and avocado and other fruit trees. It's to prevent sunburn. It's not just a ring. You want to cover the exposed surfaces that protects it from sunburn damage, which doesn't really ever fully heal. You have damage in the bark that it becomes a site for beetle infestations and other problems. Whitewashing is really easy. You just buy a light colored interior latex paint, often something seconds that's available at Home Depot or something that they couldn't sell, and dilute it 50-50 with water. So it just needs to be interior latex diluted about 50 evenly with water, and just use a brush to paint it on the exposed surfaces.
All right, and then there's these 2 questions kind of go hand in hand. They were asked by the same person. They have a lot of possums, squirrels, and birds that are getting to the fruit. Is there an effective way to keep more of these animals away. And then he also asked, what is your opinion of putting micronetting over my peach and apricot trees in order to protect from fruit loss from squirrels and birds?
Well, I've used bird netting to protect from birds. Squirrels can chew right through that and will get in anyway. I only did it 1 year, and it's a big hassle to put the nets up. And you have to completely enclose the tree on the underside as well. And when I end up with a dead bird in the morning that got caught in the netting and died, I stopped doing it. And I'd rather have them take some of the fruit and not kill them. It's really hard to control vertebrate pests in our yard. You know, rats love, citrus. Possums are mostly probably getting it on the ground. But rats and squirrels and things, they're really hard to control without doing some kind of using a trapping method to kill them.
Okay, then final question is, I have a lot of dead twiggy branches. What's the problem?
That's actually not a problem. It's just typical of citrus. And often you have a lot of little dead twiggy branches that you can prune off just to make it look nicer. But it's not a symptom of anything being wrong.
That very often happens in the interior part of the tree. When a branch isn't getting very much sunlight, the tree kind of abandons it. And that's the only kind of pruning, really, that kind of fine detail pruning to remove those dead twigs and branches so they don't damage the fruit. But be sure you use an anvil pruner. It's very different than the bypass pruner, or else you'll ruin the bypass pruners, because those twigs are as hard as dowels. But that's generally the only type of pruning that people do fairly regularly on citrus is those interior branches. You won't find that on the exterior. One thing about controlling the vertebrates I might mention, that probably is the biggest problem for fruit growers around the Southern California. Nobody really addresses the problem because it's illegal to kill the squirrels. You can kill the ground squirrels because they're considered a pest, but not the tree squirrels unless you get a hunting license, and you can control them. But the way we've controlled ours, particularly in apricot trees and things where the fruit is really great, is to use a have-a-heart electric fence that's used for pets. And if you put that around the tree, it has a little either battery operated or plugged in. If you touch it or run into it, it'll give you a little shock. You'll know it's there. But it was very effective. About between 3 and 6 inches off the ground, the wire goes all the way around the peripheral of the tree at the drip line. And once they get discouraged, they don't come back very, very often. And there are some sprays that will deter pets and also some of the vertebrate animals that are made of fox blood and a whole bunch of proprietary solutions. But that's the best way to do it. Poisoning them is a bad idea because then a lot of the predatory birds, the raptors, get that animal and they die and they take it back to their nests. But a little electric fence, if you really want to protect the fruit, is worthwhile. And as Jeff says, netting sounds good, but it's awful hard to do.
Yeah, unfortunately, vertebrate pests are one of the banes of many people's existence, especially if you live near a wildland interface where you have a lot of them and they're very hard to control. All right, thanks everybody.